In a lot of ways, the term proof of concept is the only phrase that feels honest when describing the very first Assassin's Creed game. At times, it really does feel like the idea of this game shouldn't have survived whatever meeting or boardroom it was pitched in. It's a slow, methodical game about political conflict set during the Third Crusade, built around a repetition, restraint, and long stretches of silence. Who in their right mind would willingly play something like that, right? It sounds like the kind of idea you'd hear get sanded down today in favor of something a little more louder and eye-catching. And yet, this game was still able to resonate with audiences around the globe and even spawned an entire franchise after its wake, one of which that would ultimately go on to transcend the medium of video games itself as well. As of the time of writing this, the Assassin's Creed brand has now gone on to feature a myriad of other media and entertainment besides video games, like a fully live-action and theatrically released movie in 2016, one that apparently didn't sit well with most viewers, but I haven't seen it, and it is still an accomplishment/milestone for the franchise nonetheless, as well as a Netflix series in the works too apparently, supposedly set to air sometime in late 2026 or early 2027, as well as an extensive and impressive amount of literature, one of which that includes numerous novels and comic books that expand the lore of the Assassins and Templars quite a bit. And of course, who could forget the countless board games, art books, and other high-end collectibles like minifigures and statuettes and stuff like that. Plus, there are even things like audio dramas, podcasts, and augmented reality experiences you can find too if you're really fiending for some Assassin's Creed content. My personal favorite of these little engagement opportunities, if you will, are the historian podcasts you can find on the Assassin's Creed Echoes of History YouTube channel. On this channel, Ubisoft basically brings in a random historian that specializes in whatever era that specific game is set in, and just simply asks them how realistic or accurate these games are to reality. And of course they explain why if they aren't. Plus, this is like the only chance these guys get to drop as many historical fun facts about the time period they've studied most of their life that they get. So you bet their ass they're going to use that time wisely and not waste it. All jokes aside though, I really like this channel because it's not only super informative and entertaining, but it also feels like a huge step in the right direction for the franchise with all these missteps recently. With this video, I wanted to do things differently, so I decided to pick up a few books to read before I ended up actually writing this script. And believe it or not, I actually ended up reading far more than I initially intended when preparing to make this video, which is ultimately what pushed this video back a month into some change. But I really wanted to finish these books because I felt like I just couldn't discuss this game itself without first completing them from cover to cover for some odd reason. Mainly because I didn't know that much about the Third Crusade beforehand, and I really didn't want to look like a jackass talking about something I really have no idea about. But nevertheless, I see now that probably was a dumb idea to push this video back so long. Regardless though, if you want to pick up any of these books for yourself, I'll definitely leave them in the bibliography in the description, as well as like an Amazon link or something like that. And the books I'm talking about, of course, are as follows. The first one was Warriors of God by James Reston Jr. This is probably the most informative Third Crusade book there is out there, or at least out of the few that I've seen. The next was titled The New Knighthood by Malcolm Barber. It's essentially an in-depth dissection of the history of the Templars, and of course Oliver Bowden's The Secret Crusade. I've also drawn heavily from a book titled The Making of Assassin's Creed 15th Anniversary. It's basically the official retrospective of the series and was published sometime in 2023. It compiles tons of things like developer interviews, early concept art, and reflections from the people who actually built the franchise from the ground up, which is why I'll be referring to it as the official retrospective for the rest of this video. I hope you can understand. And again, like I said, a full bibliography will be in the description for anyone curious and/or for anyone who wants to just pick up these books and read them for yourself. Because I do believe they're worth your time, honestly. I didn't have a bad time reading them. With that being said, however, this is a video that I've been wanting to make for a long time now, and I've been quietly and meticulously tweaking and revising the script of it in every little way I can for the last 3 weeks now, so I think it's best for everyone that I just go on and put it out there. Again, before the video starts though, as a reminder, all sources and information used in the making/research of this video will be included in the description, as well as a chapter list for those interested, because I highly doubt anybody's going to watch this whole thing in one sitting. I also just wanted to say a quick heartfelt thank you to the viewers who put these videos on in the background or while you're studying or gaming or doing the dishes or whatever. However you enjoy watching these videos, I appreciate you a lot and that means the world to me, seriously. I noticed the channel practically doubled in size since my last upload, and I suppose I should probably welcome all those new faces too. So, hey, what's up? Hope you stay a while. I was going to save that message for the end of the video, but I feel like it needs to be heard, and at the time of writing this, I still technically don't know how long this video is actually going to be, so I figured I'd just go on and say it now and get it over with. Nevertheless, sorry for the little preface rant. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the video. Assassin's Creed, developed by Ubisoft Montreal and released in 2007 for both Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 consoles, with an extended Director's Edition PC port arriving the following year in 2008 with some extra content, is arguably one of the most realistic and conceptually ambitious games I've ever had the pleasure to have played. I mean, I really can't stress this enough whenever I say this. The sheer number of stars that had to align in order for a game like this to actually be made and presented to players, and not only the way it was, but also the time that it was, has to be no less than 1 million if I had to guess. Seriously, keep in mind that this is a game starring a Syrian protagonist that came out during the height of the United States' war on terror and ongoing invasion of the Middle East, an event that technically didn't end until August of 2021, only for it to be ignited literally during the recording of this very video in 2026. This also happened literally yesterday at the time of recording this very sentence, so this is going to be the last thing I'm going to be adding to this script. I know Ubisoft is technically a French company and all, and they weren't really catering specifically to American audiences when making this game, but I only bring up these facts to highlight how cool it is to see a somewhat positive representation of the Middle East that arrived during a time where many of the depictions of the place were more or less either extremely negative as hell or racist as shit. And, bonus points for both. In America anyway, I can't really speak for the rest of the world. The more that I think about it, it is truly astronomical that this game didn't spark some kind of ridiculous political controversy over here in the States, when you consider how much this game went on to accomplish, everything this game attempts to do, and possibly more importantly, what it attempts to actually say. At first glance, the game appears to be nothing more than a stylish historical action-adventure kind of game with an interesting take on things like stealth mechanics, set sometime during the Third Crusade, while also being filled with a plethora of things like rooftop chases, sword fights, and the ability to perform dramatic assassinations on some rather unsuspecting foes ashore. But I, for one, could never help but see this game as so much more than just another run-of-the-mill stealth game, with a somewhat captivating and compelling story that follows it. Over the years, I've never really been able to shake the bizarre amount of admiration I hold for this game, for the weight it attempts to shoulder alone, and for the depth of what it reaches towards. Even when it doesn't quite get there, you still look up at what it was aiming for and say to yourself, damn, you really tried that, huh? Out of both respect and awe. Like when you see a gifted high school athlete attempt to dunk while driving towards the basket knowing damn well that the coach did not draw that play up during their timeout a few seconds ago. It's an aspiration for a goal I imagine some fans would find misplaced, or even a little embarrassing. And given how easily this first entry is often dismissed or outright discredited by the broader fanbase nowadays, almost 20 years after its launch, I don't really think I'm that far off with that assessment, but I am a little biased because, I'm the one who wrote the damn sentence and all. And yet, it's still the one game inside the entire franchise that has stayed with me for the longest, or stayed in my head the longest anyway. It was somehow able to resonate with me and draw me into it in ways I still struggle to put into words, despite the absurd amount of time I've already spent talking about video games in my free time on the internet already, and despite the 30,000 words inside this text document. With that being said, though, I'm also totally okay with accepting that this game is not perfect. In fact, the very first Assassin's Creed game is not the best video game ever made, nor would I be willing to claim that it was flawless. It has a laundry list of those, and I won't dare lie to you by claiming otherwise in order to paint this game in a more admirable light or anything like that. But what I will say is this: none of these flaws or shortcomings have ever hindered my enjoyment of this game's narrative or ruined the respect I have for this game, and its concept in general. I, for one, believe there can be a lot of beauty in restraint, and in the art of simplicity, and Assassin's Creed, the first game anyway, is nothing if not both of those things, all while still attempting to confront some arguably nuanced topics and issues we still face today, like systemic corruption, religious extremism, and the chasing of personal enlightenment all at the same time. As if the average video game on the shelf just features these topics and lessons, or as if these are just average questions somebody asks themselves every day. I mean, seriously, I can't recall any other AAA video game with the balls to be this contemporary and abrasive in nature while presenting its narrative. And the way things are looking, it might stay that way for a long time. Video games, especially of the AAA variety, usually tend to play it a lot safer nowadays than they did back in the day, in fear of crafting something too abstract that might not sell as well as an IP that's already been established, or of the idea that a new IP just simply cannot compete with existing properties on the market. Like Fortnite, they're all pretty much just worried about Fortnite nowadays, but you get the gist of what I was saying. Games are also heaps more expensive to make nowadays, so if taking a risk was like them stepping onto a tightrope, then imagine as the years go on, the thread of said tightrope is only getting thinner and thinner, until eventually there's probably not going to be any tightrope there at all. At times, though, I can't help but get the feeling that Assassin's Creed 1 was designed with somewhat esoteric intentions. It was just doomed to be released into an exoteric market. Which in itself isn't really a bad thing, of course. It only means that the game was seen by more eyes at the end of the day. But when you really think about it, this game wasn't really designed for everyone, so to speak. So the problem arises when you remember that this game was also sort of marketed to players as a power fantasy to an extent, while also trying to introduce them to a unique rendition and overall blend of things like stealth gameplay, fluid parkour mechanics, and, dare I even say, an unequaled level of open-world exploration. Exploration that not only felt fresh and exciting at the time, but also sort of stands out more and more today due to how none of the other Assassin's Creed games follow this kind of linear but still technically open-world format, when it comes to how the map is designed anyway. To be fair, Assassin's Creed 3 also attempted something like this with the Frontier area, but it ultimately ended up getting nailed to the wall just like the Kingdom did in this game. So I really doubt the developers are ever going to find any kind of common ground with the fans on this specific subject anyway. Speaking of which, the map, or maps I guess, of the first game are so much more interesting when you look back at them, because not only were they packed with a lot of historical weight based on how meticulously the developers and environmental artists worked to digitally recreate them, going as far as to hire actual ancient archaeological specialists to help them make the most accurate depictions of these houses and places as possible. But since there are only a handful of actual locations and landmarks in the game in general, it left a lot more room for the artists themselves to make them as sculpted and polished as possible. And I'd even argue that these places are so much more emotionally impactful than players might originally think because of the additional touch-up work applied. Sure, an argument could totally be made that these kinds of things can help take you out of the game and ruin your immersion. Like anybody who's played the game long enough has seen the Optimus Prime house, right? But I'd actually go as far as to say that these things and little details actually spice things up and help me remember this map a whole lot more, even if deep down I can totally accept that there were probably no houses in the style of Optimus Prime back in the day. Each, Jerusalem, Acre, and Damascus were equally designed to both serve a narrative purpose and/or signal an emotional implication to the player's subconscious. And one of the main ways the developers tried to do this is through the use of color theory, or simply the use of colors and filters to convey specific emotions or tones to the player. Like how the opening cinematic also uses color grading to convey a specific message. The same goes for each and every city or location in the game, and they're all architecturally unique as well, which is just a nice addition that makes sense and enhances the actual world of this game too. Even though this game is pretty small and compact when compared to its successors, the fact that you can still identify where you are based on the memorization of specific in-game landmarks, or even simply the recognition of house designs, or even by the fact that your actual screen looks different depending on what district you're in. I don't know, I just thought that was so cool. It just feels like the player was in every discussion the developers had when creating this game. Damascus has this gold hue applied to the screen when Altair/the player are in the city, which signals back to me that this place is incredibly hot and arid. It also allows these structures with these beautiful golden domes to shine in a spectacular way that other locations in the game simply cannot offer, which also makes for a pretty damn good view atop any one of the city's many towers as well, if I may add. Jerusalem might just be my favorite location in the entire game though, just because of the fact that the filter applied to this area lets these well-flavored greens and browns of this game irradiate through the screen better than any of the other cities, even the Kingdom. Acre, on the other hand, however, is almost entirely opposite from Jerusalem and Damascus in both vibes and architecture. For starters, the filter applied to this region is a cool, deep blue, and it's as dreary as can be. I get that it's supposed to signal back to the players how much more hindered or damaged Acre is by the Crusades, opposed to the game's two other cities, who seem to be thriving because of the war, if anything. Acre is also kind of interesting because, at the time, the city was mostly controlled by English and other Crusader forces, which meant that the developers could experiment a little by adding some more 12th century Gothic architecture and more European-style housing here and there, in order to help sell the era/European influence on the city at the time a little more in the players' minds. Even though technically, Gothic architecture didn't start to appear in this region of the world for another few decades, but let's be real, most of the players aren't even going to notice this little of a detail, and it's not like it ruins the aesthetic of the city or anything like that, so I don't mind it. As a matter of fact, I actually think the choice to be creative and to focus on the emotion of these cities by having each one of them quote-unquote pop in certain ways and having them be highlighted with certain colors and filters communicates the environment and tone to the players instantaneously and a lot better, and results in them being far more memorable than they would have been otherwise, but that's just me. And what's the one place that connects all of these areas, including Arsuf that only appears at the end of the game, you may ask? Well, that would be none other than the Kingdom. This area is a total tonal contrast to everything else this game has to offer. It's a place where Altair and the player will have to traverse through a few times before the story is over, and when doing so, you'll probably notice how big and empty it is opposed to the more neatly compact cities that you're used to inhabiting, and that this place attempts to guide you towards. This was probably done on purpose if I had to guess, to work as a juxtaposition of sorts, but there are still a few side objectives and collectibles tied to the place as well, so it's technically not completely useless. Granted, the things assigned to this place is just flags and nameless Templars, but that's beside the point. The idea, I imagine, was to have this area make the Holy Land feel a lot wider and larger than it actually is in the game. Because in real life, these cities are miles upon miles apart after all, and the player is supposed to assume that traveling these large distances is actually taking Altair a few days. So if that was the goal, I'd say it worked, but I don't know if it worked for everybody. I also seen a player on Reddit recount their time playing the game completely HUD-less, meaning no type of minimap or objective markers or any kind of user interface guiding them whatsoever. And they claimed that this playthrough was able to change how they viewed the kingdom entirely. They reportedly had to stop and read road signs in order to navigate the area effectively now, and it made them appreciate the area/map a whole lot more than they once did. Which is so goddamn cool, man. I've never personally tried to do a HUD-less playthrough or anything like that, but even I can kind of get a newfound appreciation for the place after reading that comment. As a matter of fact, upon further reading of the official retrospective during the revising of this very script, I found a segment where Patrice Désolé, the creator of Assassin's Creed as well as the creative director of the first few Assassin's Creed games, says that he originally wanted Assassin's Creed to have no UI at all, but this idea was later scrapped during the playtesting phase for obvious reasons. However, this is a decision that ultimately led to why the HUD was so integrated into the narrative through things like the Animus in the first place. I'd also argue that by choosing to do this, it gives the game and its narrative an extra layer of texture that only enhances the player's immersion. But I can't really prove that, that's just my opinion. The extra dedication or time the team spent on the UI also led to things like Ecovision being created as well. What I think truly sets this game apart from most, though, in my opinion anyway, is the fact that Assassin's Creed isn't exactly a traditional/classic kind of historical fiction story. It was more or less just using history as a tool, or as a stage rather, kind of like how Uncharted or Indiana Jones does it. Only Assassin's Creed hones in on those historical themes and undertones a whole lot more than those stories do in order to tell a much larger, more complex story, while also throwing in a few sci-fi elements in the mix too because, I mean, why not, right? Who doesn't like sci-fi? You see, traditional historical stories that tend to focus more on the past eras with some established norms, often featuring grand events, a clear-cut depiction of morality, and a sense of a shared belonging. Contemporary historical fiction stories, however, like to use past settings while attempting to explore more modern sensibilities, individual complexities that may arise, and even explore diverse perspectives that may still apply to certain people today. And sometimes, this doesn't happen with every one of the stories, mind you, but if you're lucky, they even attempt to challenge traditional social systems as well, which makes the past feel relatable and relevant in the modern age as a result. While yes, Assassin's Creed definitely puts in its elbow grease to establish itself in the time frame it was going for, but since the entire story is essentially about both Desmond and Altair's eventual understanding of the truth, and is all technically tied into the theory that the world is ending in the year 2012, I think one could totally make the argument that the story is trying to explore more modern sensibilities. Although I doubt any player is aware of any of this based on the first game alone. Most of that information is explained away in the mini sequels, but I'm getting a little too ahead of myself. The actual concept of Assassin's Creed comes from a real-life group known as the Order of Assassins, or the medieval Hassasins, that operated in certain parts of Persia from around 1090 to 1275. Patrice Désolé reportedly read about this ancient group in one of his university textbooks, and after wanting to branch away from the Prince of Persia franchise Ubisoft was so heavily in love with at the time, he was presented with the opportunity to make another game for Ubisoft after the success of 2003's Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, and saw this as a great opportunity to do just that, and to tell a completely new story, perhaps even one with some proper nuance to it this time around. Which is why one of the very first things the team decided to do was to tell this story diegetically, meaning small details about the main characters are going to be given to the player through tiny bits and pieces of conversation between them and the NPCs, some of which can even be missed if you're not too careful, which was not like anything the team had ever worked on previously. The levels in Assassin's Creed were also designed in a totally new way as well, making them stand out significantly when comparing this game to other 3D platformers of the time. Technically speaking, this is an open-world game, but in reality, the pacing of the story forces you to experience each part of these very limited maps at different parts of the story. The game chooses to digitally wall off certain parts of each city until the player reaches that section of the story. And this is very clever for several reasons. For starters, and to put it simply, there aren't too many areas to explore in the game as it is, like I said previously. So in a way, this allowed the developers to reuse the certain buildings without making the game feel too recycled, which you have to give them credit for. This also makes each city feel a little bigger than they actually are. Like, in my honest opinion, this is a very cool way to design an open world map, because at the end of the game everything is open and unlocked for you to explore, but while you're actually progressing through the story, you're limited to only one district. I know this is like such a minor thing to point out, but I really liked this, and I'm always wondering why more games aren't developed in this way, especially games with the smaller maps. I mean, it just makes sense, right? The story is also being told to the player through two perspectives, the first one being through Desmond Miles in the modern day, and the second through Altair, one of Desmond's ancient assassin ancestors who was alive during the events of the Third Crusade. Although the two stories may seem separate at first, they become more and more intertwined as the game progresses, and I always liked this detail. The way the game connects the two protagonists, and even the player to these two protagonists if you want to look at things from a more meta perspective, is rather interesting though. The game does so through the Animus, which is this futuristic, sci-fi-esque device that allows people to relive the memories of their ancestors that are sort of embedded deep inside their own DNA. The device is also treated as a kind of a therapy tool, which was always something that fascinated me. Much like actual therapy, progress in the machine happens gradually and over the course of multiple days. Most sessions don't result in extraordinary breakthroughs, but sometimes they just build familiarity, stability, and trust between the subject and what they're confronting. And there's nothing wrong with that either, by the way. Sometimes progress happens slower than you might have hoped for, but that doesn't mean it still isn't progression. The game also uses real historical settings and figures, like Jerusalem, Acre, and even King Richard the Lionheart, as tools for its story, basically reimagining and reshaping them all through this fictional lens to help fit the overall narrative the game is going for, which is pretty obvious to anyone playing, of course, but I feel like some things need to be somewhat overly clarified before I go into the actual narrative portion of this video. The Assassins and Templars, while somewhat grounded in the real historical factions of the time, are kind of transformed into symbolic opposites and hate each other in this game a whole lot more than the actual real-life factions did at the end of the day. Although there are still a few accounts of the two groups participating in conflicts, if I'm not mistaken. In Assassin's Creed, though, one group is depicted as fighting for freedom through chaos, and the other for control through order. And this somehow makes them mortal enemies rather than mutual opposites. In my eyes, this is the first inkling for the player to take a step back and ask themselves if there really is such a thing as a good guy and a bad guy in this story. I know practically everyone on the internet has made the claim that a game they love is super deep and underrated by a majority of its players at one point or another. But as cliche as this sounds, I feel like AC1 genuinely tries to ask some rather tough and thought-provoking questions. It's either they just get completely ignored or sidestepped entirely by the players. Like, what if the things you read about in your high school history book aren't actually how things played out? And what if our understanding of the past is built on the meddling or manipulation or maybe even the lies of a mysterious cabal who wishes to control every aspect of the world? I know most of them are borderline conspiracy theories, but this sort of a metatextual blend of both historical fiction and a philosophical inquiry gives this game a distinct and intriguing identity. And if I'm being honest, most of this stuff doesn't even seem so far-fetched anymore considering all the shit that's came out or been exposed in the news in the years following this game's release, but that's besides the point. Another thing that I feel like people constantly forget is that in the year 2007, the meaning of Assassin's Creed wasn't associated with climbing towers or taking out meaningless targets just yet, although those are things you can still technically do in this game if you really wanted to. It was more or less about exploring the gray areas of morality, questioning authority, and engaging with the ideas most games weren't willing to touch with a 10-foot pole at the time. At least, that's what I always subconsciously thought about Assassin's Creed in its early days. I'm not too sure how everyone else quietly viewed it back in the day, nor am I willing to comb through thousands of reviews just to find something so minuscule out, honestly. But I will confidently say this. The kind of raw ambition that is seemingly always on display and that Assassin's Creed wears on its shoulder is so intoxicating, and it's ultimately what made Assassin's Creed stand out so significantly to me and so many other gamers if I had to guess. This game feels like the beginning of something so much bigger. Even as a kid playing this game for the first time all those years ago, I knew the game was going to get expanded upon just because it was so damn fun. Even before I had any kind of idea what the video game industry was or how sequels are greenlit, I just knew this game had the possibility to both metaphorically and literally print money if given the chance. And looking back now, I think it's safe to say that it totally can, and preteen me was right. Which is rare, mind you, so I feel like I have to at least mention that. At the time of its release, Assassin's Creed also stood toe-to-toe with some historic titans like Call of Duty 4, Halo 3, BioShock, Mass Effect, and even Super Mario Galaxy, along with all the other countless hits Nintendo presented gamers with the debut of the Wii that same exact year. Yet, Assassin's Creed didn't flinch a single muscle. The game still managed to carve out its own path in that incredibly competitive landscape and quickly established a strong foothold on the market, ultimately becoming the 8th best-selling video game of 2007, as well as garnering a somewhat devoted following of fans who were just as eager to see where the story was going to take them just as much as they were to merely play the damn game. Perhaps what also made Assassin's Creed particularly so compelling to the masses was its approach to historical reinterpretation. While many were quick to praise the game for its accurate depictions of ancient landmarks and major historical events like the Siege of Acre and the Battle of Arsuf, the true power of the narrative came from its speculative what-if scenarios, in my opinion. Like, what happens when power corrupts those who were once seen as virtuous or favorable? How often do hidden agendas shape the public's memory of significant events? And perhaps the most obvious and my personal favorite one, did Christianity really originate from another advanced life form, or in this case, object, that we just couldn't understand at the time?
What is this treasure?
It is temptation.
It's just a piece of silver.
Look at it.
What am I supposed to see?
This piece of silver cast out Adam and Eve. It turned staves into snakes, parted and closed the Red Sea. Ares used it to start the Trojan War, and with it a poor carpenter turned water into wine.
It seems rather plain for all the power you claim it has.
To be fair, ancient astronaut theory is something that some people actually believe, and Assassin's Creed did not invent the theory by any means. If I'm being honest though, Assassin's Creed actually makes it seem a lot more believable than anything the History Channel ever produced on the subject, but that's all neither here nor there. This willingness to challenge conventional storytelling, to fill in the historical gaps with intriguing possibilities, is what set Assassin's Creed apart from the rest of the crowd. And the best part about it is it doesn't just try to replace or rewrite history. If anything, the game tries as hard as it can to enrich our understanding of it by using fiction as a sort of a filter, using these famous names and notable places as nothing more than spices to make an already tasty dish that much tastier, if you will. Speaking of crowds though, only a powerful engine could provide developers with such a luxury, and a powerful engine was something Ubisoft Montreal didn't have at the time. You see, Ubisoft had previously utilized the Jade engine to develop the Prince of Persia games, and the Montreal team just knew that this engine wasn't capable of living up to what they had hoped to deliver with Assassin's Creed. The Jade engine was primarily used for its ease in designing corridor games and linear levels, which is exactly the opposite of what the team had in mind here in Assassin's Creed. And perhaps more importantly, the Jade engine could simply not support more than a few NPCs on screen at once, let alone these vast open sprawls of human traffic like the team had envisioned. Both of these, and a few other factors I'm sure, led the team to deciding to build their own engine from scratch while also working on Assassin's Creed at the same time. Which, as Claude Langlis, a video game programmer who worked on the first few Assassin's Creed games, puts it, was really hard to pull off. Quote, "It was a real challenge. Building a game itself is hard work, but building a game while the engine itself is evolving over time is a monumental task." End quote. Jade Raymond, the godmother of the franchise and producer of Assassin's Creed 1, as well as the executive producer of Assassin's Creed 2 and Bloodlines, also added this, quote, "Within a few short years, we had created a brand new engine and a brand new IP. The concepts we had were great, but we were pretty stressed because the engine wasn't ready yet. I remember a moment where we had like 21 level designers, which was a lot at the time, who simply had no tools to use. They were sitting there and panicking. Half of the group was still prototyping in the old engine, and people were coming to me and saying they wanted to get their work done, but they didn't have the tools. It was super frustrating. There was a list of features to build, and it was just a lot. Everything was so ambitious." End quote. After hearing all of that, it's a wonder that this game was ever even finished in the first place, to be honest. I can't even begin to imagine the amount of stress these developers were under, especially when you consider that this game was originally planned to be released on the PlayStation 2 as well, which I shit you not was something that was genuinely attempted for some ungodly reason. But eventually, and thankfully, that idea got abandoned after the team realized there were just too many huge technical differences between the upcoming consoles like the PlayStation 3 and the limitations of Sony's older hardware. In reality, there was just no way anyone was going to be able to make that happen, no matter how good of a programmer they were. But that didn't stop the team from wasting a few months of the precious and very limited time they had left to try and make this game actually work, however. Apparently, and this is actually kind of crazy the more you think about it, wholesale development on the project didn't truly begin until sometime in 2005, with the team beginning to publicly market and promote the game later in 2006 at events like E3 and through magazine publications like Game Informer as well. Despite this somewhat rocky of a start, however, that didn't mean the team had no fun whatsoever when working on this game. As the legend goes, the team's chants and claps of excitement could be heard all throughout the offices where numerous other Ubisoft teams were busy working on different games. And Jade Raymond even shared some somewhat wholesome stories of her and a few other members of the team going out to get a bunch of smelly cheese and wine to boost everyone's mood when things weren't going as expected. When I hear stories like that, I can't help but feel like these people saw each other as more than just co-workers. They actually cared about each other on somewhat of a personal level, which is another something that's seemingly becoming more and more rare as the gaming industry continues to grow. But that too is beside the point. However, all that free time the concept artists had didn't get put to waste, despite how some people may have felt at the time. This glorious extended conceptual period of the game's development is arguably what led to making the lead protagonist so iconic and memorable. So, like most things, that extra time was nothing more than a blessing in disguise. Altair, as brash and brooding as he is, was ultimately one of the first things that concept artists came up with when brainstorming ideas for protagonists in Assassin's Creed, reportedly taking at least a full day to do so, and the team loved him almost immediately. Although the real-life Order of Assassins didn't walk around Persia in these big white hoods, or with hidden blades disguised in fancy gauntlets, this concept was way too cool for everyone on the team to pass up on. And you can't say that it doesn't look badass seeing a fully decked out Altair jumping from roof to roof. Speaking of which, Altair's design itself is very simplistic and minimalist when compared to the robes of the other assassins who would come in future iterations, I'll admit, and I actually think that's why I prefer his robes over everyone else's in the franchise. Even when Altair is equipped with all of his weapons and accessories, he's still able to blend in with scholars and priests almost seamlessly, and it looks far more believable because of the formulaic kind of design in my opinion. Plus, the fact that these robes aren't specifically his, they're essentially just the robes any assassin wears in the Order, it just kinda made this outfit feel a lot more realistic to me personally, and a lot more believable of a hidden order to do. I'm not saying the other protagonists' outfits are bad by any means or anything, I'm just trying to say that it's very clear a lot of time, effort, and thought was put into Altair's character in general, opposed to some of the other protagonists we get to play as in the future, all the way down to his name. The name Altair actually means flying eagle in the Arabic language, and it's also the name of a very specific star in the Aquila constellation. These two things say everything about Altair that a player needs to know, as Sebastian Puel, a former executive producer of the Assassin's Creed franchise, puts it. Quote, "That name really showed us what the character was. He was an eagle, a bird of prey. He was in the sky and on the roofs. He would look at his prey and hit them when he decided." End quote. As if that wasn't cool enough, apparently the other reason why the team decided to go with this name was because of the similarities it shares with the in-game systems like Eagle Vision and the synchronization system, which sort of makes sense when you start to think about it. Things like Eagle Vision and viewpoints are crucial components to this game, along with pretty much every open-world video game that came after it as well, but that's besides the point. And the player is most likely going to spend a lot of time using these tools, so I guess it's kind of cool knowing that Altair is tied to them in more ways than one. Plus, there's a clip from the Assassin's Creed dev diary where Jade Raymond talks about how Altair, when in leaping position mind you, even resembles an eagle in flight.
If you notice, he's wearing a hood which has a little point in the front, and he has a robe that kind of splits out on the sides, and when he's in movement the sides flip up, and if you were to look at a shadow cast from the side of him, you'd get the angle of the point of the hood and then the sides of the skirt flapping up, and you'd get the shadow of an eagle. So Altair really is the bird of prey.
It's pretty obvious that a lot of time and dedication was poured into this project. Ubisoft even went as far as to release 2 cinematic trailers to help boost the hype for this game, and I have to say, they might just be the 2 most brilliantly executed gaming promotional cinematics I've ever seen, marketing-wise anyway. And it is the official start of a trend that pretty much every game will continue in the near future, all the way up until the RPG saga. This superb cinematic is the first thing that players see when booting up the game, and it was used in a ton of marketing campaigns Ubisoft released as promotional material as well. It opens up with a nice color-graded shot of the city before panning in towards Altair and his Templar target. The specific type of color grading being used here, though, is called bleach bypass, which is a film processing technique where the bleaching step is either skipped or reduced during color film development, resulting in a unique, almost muted visual effect characterized by increased contrast and reduced saturation. Or in other words, looking almost as if a black and white image is overlaid on top of the colored image. The practice is also known as a skip bleach or silver retention, but the effect is usually always the same. I'm also aware that it's technically just a filter here as well, but the fact that the cinematic trailer is taking reference from actual film techniques gives me the feeling that whoever made this trailer, or whoever was responsible for it in some way, at least knew an inkling of what they were doing. And I mean, let's be honest, you can pretty much tell just from the first few opening shots. After people are finished marveling over this minor detail though, the camera then pans down to set the scene by showing an execution taking place in the middle of the city, much like how they actually happened back in these days, but that's neither here nor there. Then, in the very next shot, the camera shows a close-up of a nearby eagle making its way around the town that also coincidentally leads the camera to Altair, which is a nice visual nod to the audience that says, hey, these two things are intertwined in some way, wink wink. Nextly, Altair is seen standing on top of this church bell tower, but as soon as the bell actually chimes, he's gone. The next time we get to see him, he's in the crowd, and as he's making his way up to his target, he pulls out a sick-ass crossbow and fires an arrow at one guy before stabbing the other with said crossbow, and then he kinda just leaves it in the guy's shoulder as he continues onward. I always wondered why the crossbow never made it into the final version of the game, especially after it was in this trailer and all. But after googling it, I found out it's because the devs realized the game's engine had a hard time tracking the crossbow's individual bolts if they were fired too quickly. And because they also thought it kind of broke the gameplay loop they were going for, you know, with you being like up close and personal and a blade in the crowd and all, because it essentially allowed you to just snipe your targets from a farther range than originally intended. A part of me secretly wishes they would have workshopped this idea a little more and possibly made the crossbow a close range only kind of weapon, kind of like how the throwing knives are, but sometimes even those things have a hard time connecting to targets, and when they do, it usually only takes one to instantly incapacitate a guard and take them out of the fight entirely. So I could see why this idea was scrapped altogether, honestly. Once Altair is close enough to his target though, he lunges at him, and this was arguably the first time the world got to lay or feast their eyes on the somewhat notorious Hidden Blade, an item that most fans of the franchise seem to be somewhat ambivalent about nowadays based on what I've seen online. I'd argue this thing blew everyone's mind when they first seen it back in the day though, but I can't really prove whether that's for certain or not. What I can say though is that it definitely blew my little kid mind out of orbit when I laid my eyes on it around the age of 8 or 9 or so, and I can vividly recall one time when my older cousin made his very own homemade version of the Hidden Blade by combining a leather gauntlet and a switchblade. And that was arguably one of the most dangerous and badass things that younger me had ever seen at the time. Fuck, it still might be, to be honest. It's not really the most complex of tools or devices, I'll admit, but I feel like this is another perfect example of how simplicity helps the game shine. The simple act of how an assassin uses the Hidden Blade is exactly what gives the item its unique aura. And that especially goes for the first game, because you know, in this one it cost you a whole ring finger and all. The beauty is mostly in its design, too. I put quotations around the word mostly because the Hidden Blade is deliberately modeled to be as modest as possible. It's small, almost totally silent, or at least silent enough that no guard ever hears it retract or activate, even when you're directly behind them. It can be easily concealed beneath the wrist and underneath most clothing, and it lacks the theatrical presence of a sword or a firearm. Meaning if the developers want this weapon to resonate with the audience or for it to mean anything to them, it not only has to be vividly clear what the weapon's intent is from first glance, but also just as easily for them to actually perform mechanically, or else it's never going to be this icon it was intended to be. For example, the Force wielders of Star Wars have their lightsabers, the Mario Brothers have their magic mushrooms, Halo has the energy sword, and Gears of War has the classic or Lancer rifle. These things are arguably only as popular and as easily identifiable as they are because they don't actually require much thought to register the item's objective thanks to the clever designs the concept artists probably spent days thinking about. A chainsaw mounted on the end of a gun is obviously going to rip shit in half, and a sword made out of pure glowing energy is not only going to cut through the air like butter, but it's also going to be filled with some wacky sounds as it does so. That much is just a given. And even though it's a little hard to actually believe so, these little details that seem almost meaningless are ultimately what help these things remain in your head for as long as they do. Even the Hidden Blade itself is no stranger to iconic sound effects. Apparently, the developers and sound designers at Ubisoft Montreal managed to capture the sound we can hear in the game by combining and layering the sounds of a switchblade opening and a camera shuttering together into one unanimous sound, which results in the iconic sound you hear today. The tool also requires a direct proximity to the target, some immense amounts of patience at times, and a clear, distinct intention from its wielder. Unlike other weapons that may or may not invite similar levels of curiosity from players, the hidden blade exists to end conflict before it actually begins. Its use implies a preparation, a restraint, and acceptance of consequence. You cannot just swing it wildly or recover from a misuse of an attack as easily as you could from any other weapon in the game. And not only is this thematically true, but it's mechanically true as well. The hidden blade actually has the tightest parry window out of every other weapon in the entire game. And the precision behind one's strikes, as well as the manner in which how they actually wield the thing, defines the assassin long before any kind of cloaks, symbols, or mottos ever get to. The hidden blade is not really a weapon meant for combat, and although you can technically use it in that way if you really desired, it would be much more effective to rely on the other weapons the game provides you if things ever escalate to that point, if I'm being honest. The hidden blade doesn't really become useful offensively until the second game and onward. Here in the first game, it's nothing more than a resource that is clearly designed with one idea in mind, and that's making you a deadly blade in a vast crowd. The hidden blade is also sort of the clearest through line across the entire franchise when you think about it as well. It's a symbol that's more or less been proved to survive both tonal shifts and a full-on mechanical reinvention, as if that were easy to do. Apart from the additional offensive features, however, it's more or less stayed the same throughout every entry. Focusing back on the actual cinematic itself though, after Altair takes out its target, then the chase begins. Things quickly change from the quiet and content camera setting we were getting used to up until this point to a much more confused and jarring one as the camera starts to shake while Altair can be seen running from guards and maneuvering through the city, which is something players can actually do in-game as well, mind you. Although I've never really utilized it much myself, the chase cam is something that exists. All the way up until he runs into a closed door, which most players presumably expect to be a dead end. But just as the church bell begins to ring, the door slowly opens, revealing a sea of scholars and monks, all while Altair can be seen smiling as he fades into them, meaning this whole scenario was cleverly calculated from the very beginning. It's truly just as much of a short film as it is a trailer for the actual game. I think what makes this cinematic hit so hard for me, though, is that these are a sequence of events players will actually have to perform in the game and actually get good at to a degree if they want to beat the damn thing. And this cinematic trailer conveys it all to them and even demonstrates it to the player to an extent, all in under 2 minutes. It shows Altair stalking his prey, taking them out, and even hiding and then escaping, clearly showing the core gameplay loop players will have to follow, and the best part about it is that it's being told to them in the background while the beautiful CGI imagery takes the center stage. I know I just said that was the best thing about the trailer, but arguably the actual best part of the trailer is that it leaves you wanting more. In my opinion, that's what every trailer or marketing campaign should be wanting to do, and Assassin's Creed did it flawlessly with this one. And fortunately for the fans, that's not even the only trailer Ubisoft produced for this game either. This second trailer was viewable for fans as well. The only catch was that players had to browse the web in order to see this one, unlike the previous one. It's officially dubbed the Altair Was Here trailer, and it is yet another work of art, honestly, even if the name kinda gives the whole thing away. Normally I don't take this much time to admire trailers for the games I'm discussing, but the ones here do such a great job of world building and hype building, if I'm being honest, that I feel like I have to at least mention them before jumping straight into the actual game. This one here sets up the in-game enemies/antagonists that the assassins are constantly fighting, known as the Templars. The Templars, as portrayed in Assassin's Creed, are a powerful and shadowy organization that's rooted in the lands of the Middle East better than most trees and bushes, it seems. And they've seemingly nestled themselves so firmly in place here that their entire operation is practically still intact in the modern day as well, almost 900 years later, now better known mostly through their pharmaceutical products. Their name itself, though, as most people might have already guessed, it comes from the Knights Templar, a real-life medieval military order founded in the early 12th century mainly to protect Christian pilgrims from bandits while traveling the Holy Land during the Crusades. They often took refuge and even headquartered themselves on Temple Mount in Jerusalem, hence the name Templar. Over time, they amassed an immense amount of wealth, political influence, and even gained region-wide control of the land, equipped with their own banking network and money loaning system that most of the citizens of the land frequently partook in and somewhat trusted, becoming one of the most powerful organizations in medieval Europe before their eventual downfall in 1312. There's obviously so much more for one to talk about with the Templars because of how they held power for a couple centuries and all, but that's basically all you'd need to know to understand them in this story. Everything else is just icing on the cake for the player, so to speak. If I'm being honest, I really didn't even need to give you that history lesson. In the context of the game, these Templars are a small subsection/splinter group of the Order that decided to split from the Knights Templar to act as their own entity, if you will, known simply as the Templars. They serve as the ideological backbone of a secret global conspiracy, one that seeks to impose a peace through control by any means necessary. To them, humanity is inherently flawed and prone to chaos and to making trivial mistakes, and they believe that only through strong, centralized authority can the world be guided to a stable, unified future utopia. This belief that the ends justify the means sort of justifies, to most of the members of the Order at least, their use of certain things like manipulation, surveillance, violence, and even slavery if need be, whatever it takes to shape the course of history from the shadows. Which is ultimately what makes them so interesting. They're so similar to the Assassins, but they each point fingers at each other and act like somehow one side is so much better than the other, as if they both aren't burdened by their own beliefs all the way down to each of the group's individual cores, that you kinda just want to buy front row seats and watch these guys duke it out. The fight could really go either way just because of how similar they are to each other. Their presence during the Third Crusade is especially significant though. The Chaos/Shroud of War provides the perfect cover for the Templars to secretly advance their hidden agenda, all while the modern-day adaptation of them are busy pursuing these ancient artifacts referred to as the Pieces of Eden, which are essentially powerful artifacts created by an ancient advanced civilization called the Isu. I know I'm getting a little too ahead of myself by mentioning them this early into the script, but to sum of these devices as briefly as possible. They can control minds, create illusions, and influence entire societies of people if given the chance. And oftentimes throughout the course of human history have these things been mistaken for divine or magical objects. In the first game, the central piece of Eden is called the Apple, which is an orb-like device capable of projecting visions and manipulating people's thoughts, while also preying on one's temptations and overall willpower at the same time. I know it might not seem like it from first glance, but this thing becomes the entire core of the conflict, really, as both sides race to reclaim it, knowing its power could very well shape the future of the world. This trailer shows the Templars discussing how to deal with Altair. It's pretty obvious that he's been causing them quite a bit of worry considering how everyone's body language is, but fast forwarding to the best part, just as they all stand up to unite against him, this one guy at the end of the table doesn't stand up, and based on how everyone was talking, you'd think that this guy is going to be against them, or he has a different idea of how to deal with Altair or something like that, or whatever. But no. Instead, it becomes shockingly clear to everyone that he's been assassinated right in front of them. And just as the others finally start to panic, a blood-soaked feather falls from the sky, letting them know that Altair was there the entire time, and they didn't even notice. Also letting you know what the POV of a Templar is in case you were ever curious. There are some other cool details, like Altair being able to be seen in this little, glimpse of the mug or whatever, and as he passes by this candlelight, which is nothing more than just attention to detail, but I digress. I'm also going to go out on a limb here again and say that the best part about this is that it also conveys all of this to the player in just 2 minutes. It's short, snappy, straight to the point, and it gets players hyped for the game, and it even shouts out their website if they want to learn more information about it. This short CGI cinematic literally checks every box a trailer can, in rapid succession too. The game starts off with Altair in a garden surrounded by some faceless figures, presumably women, while the distant, disheveled voice of Al-Mu'alim can be heard quoting the Bible in the background. Well, technically it was removed from the Bible, I guess. It's the Book of Ecclesiastes 1:17 and 1:18, to be specific. It says, quote, I applied myself to know wisdom, and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also was a chasing of the wind, for in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. End quote. This isn't the only biblical reference this game is going to throw at you either, and with the game's setting being the Holy Land, it kinda makes complete sense why the writers decided to explore these specific topics. This quote itself is rather interesting though, in my opinion at least, because this is believed to be the very first ever human recording of a person having an existential crisis, questioning everything from his beliefs to his very own purpose on the earth itself. The only reason I highlight this is because it took a very long time before philosophers began to openly accept the idea that everyone's fate may not be predetermined. For example, the Greeks believed in things like cosmic order and divine foreknowledge. Existentialism wasn't the most practiced phenomenon back then, and it challenges these common beliefs by saying that human beings aren't so special, and that we weren't made to have one specific purpose. And perhaps more importantly, it's up to us to find out what our essence or purpose is. It was once theorized that King Solomon himself wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, but that was never officially proven to be a concrete fact by any historian. And the game ties this conspiracy theory in with its own story by having you find the secret of the Templar treasure underneath Solomon's temple in the first mission, basically insinuating that Solomon had the treasure and wrote the scripture, sort of combining two conspiracy theories into a neat new one. This quote/verse also embodies all the core themes that the main protagonists will experience over the course of the story, which is so goddamn clever, man. I don't know why nobody ever really talks about this, or at least acknowledges it. And I know it may not sound like it at first, but this quote is actually referring to Adam and Eve in a way as well, talking about how they cursed themselves with everlasting knowledge by accepting the forbidden fruit in that now infamous garden, which is often heavily implied through paintings and old artworks to be an apple, but the Bible never actually outright states that it was, technically. So that's where Assassin's Creed takes this fundamental concept or cultural assumption and flips it on its head by making this metaphorical fruit, the Apple of Eden, a device of sci-fi/precursor origins. You see, when Adam and Eve gained knowledge from the forbidden fruit, it only led to sorrow and suffering. It would have been way more beneficial for them to stay ignorant of these things around them so that they could live in a permanent state of eternal bliss, theoretically anyway. The Book of Ecclesiastes argues that wisdom is only valuable alongside the exploration of folly, which in itself is a sort of contradiction. So, therefore, it is kind of implied that a deeper understanding of the human experience is required to ask questions like this, which is ultimately something we don't yet have. Most of Ecclesiastes comes off as someone's cynical outlook on life, but there are also some parts that question one's morality, the concept of overwhelming knowledge, and core concepts of good and evil that could easily resonate with someone to this day. The reason I think the writers chose this specific verse/quote, though, is because fundamentally, the entire idea of the Assassins and Templars conflict is, in itself, a questioning of the concept of good and evil. Both factions want the same thing, which is world peace, but both parties involved are too busy going about it in their own stubborn ways and or fighting each other to no end in the process, that it honestly makes you kind of question if something like peace in all things is really even possible in a world filled with people like this. The second voice that comes through to the player is that of Lucy Stillman, who is voiced by a young Kristen Bell, way before her Frozen and Bad Mom days. Lucy voices her concerns to Warden Vidic, and eventually decides to make the executive decision of pulling Desmond out of the Animus before he has a chance of getting hurt or harmed. A lot of things are being subtly introduced here, but first things first. The character of Warren Vidic is voiced by Phil Proctor, whose voice is so idiosyncratic he's been able to star in multiple Pixar films like Toy Story and Monsters, Inc., and has even made some other respectable appearances in video games like Dead Rising and Call of Duty as well. Desmond Miles, though, as most players have probably already guessed, is the player character, and the modern-day ancestor of Altair. Voiced by the incredibly charismatic Nolan North, who's widely known for his work as Nathan Drake in the Uncharted franchise and most recently as Rocket Raccoon in Marvel Rivals. This is also the point where the diegetic storytelling becomes more apparent to the player. I know I've already briefly talked about this, but to make it abundantly clear, the diegetic storytelling in video games usually refers to presenting both the overall narrative and individual story elements as if they were entirely within the game's world itself, and are perceived by both the characters on screen and the player behind the controller at the same time. This often contrasts with non-diegetic elements, which are explicitly external to the game's fictional world and are directly addressed to the player only. You know, things like tutorials or HUD elements, but I digress. The reason I bring all of this up is because I actually admire the layer of depth this game uses to try and justify these elements within the actual game itself, going as far as naming the movement system the puppeteering system, in reference to how Desmond is sort of just using his dead ancestor's body as nothing more than a tool, which is equally as morbid as it is clever wordplay. Even if some things can't really be explained away so easily, I still respect the game for trying. And to be fair, most of the more video gamey elements can always be chalked up or rounded down to something involving the Animus. But I don't really think any of this was really necessary for the player to still enjoy the story being told to them. It just kinda helps things flow better, and it helps the players get immersed a little better into the narrative, since most of their questions do have an actual answer to them. You just have to, go out and look for it sometimes.
The Animus is translating speech it deems vital into more modern English, so expect a few anachronisms. I could probably make it more authentic, but... You ever read Chaucer?
Who?
Yeah, definitely not for you.
Once the scene is set, though, it's revealed that Desmond used to be a member of the Assassins himself, but then he decided to run off for some unknown reason at this moment, before later being kidnapped and held prisoner here, at what players will soon come to know as Abstergo Industries, forced to undergo various tests with a machine called the Animus. The Animus is this fictional machine/device in the Assassin's Creed series that allows users to relive memories of their ancestors through their own genetic memory, which is apparently embedded deep inside the average person's DNA. Yes, it's a rather fictional and fake-sounding scientific explanation, but it kinda seems like it could be real based on how well it's confidently explained to Desmond and the player here. Plus, the whole idea is based on a few fringe studies that Patrice Désolé and Jade Raymond discovered while researching stuff for this game, so it's not even like a made-up area of study or anything like that. But to put it in layman's terms, it basically allows this machine to sync with someone's DNA. Then the machine reconstructs a visualization of their ancestors' life experiences, letting the user see and even interact with the past as if they were really there. To a degree, you actually have to do what your ancestors actually did. You can't just go off and murder a bunch of people or do something your ancestors didn't actually do. That'll desync you. And of course, a device of this magnitude can't just be utterly flawless, but the flaws aren't revealed to the player just at this moment. The Animus is also another one of the main items of iconography that sort of ties the entire series together when you really think about it. Apart from the hidden blade, I suppose, it's the only sort of bridge between the past and present that appears in every game. And I have to say, I just love how it's treated with so much love and care into nearly every entry, give or take a few, of course. One of the most brilliant and perhaps my personal favorite way the Animus is integrated into the story, though, is through the in-game loading screens. Earlier games often use a blinding, minimalist, white void to portray these artificial reconstructions that you can walk around in while the game loads, but later games go a step further and to decorate them with some pretty cool and stylish ways to help fit that game's overall theme and tone, to a degree, mind you, which is something I've always quietly adored about these games. And with the era of loading screens seemingly coming to an end thanks to the never-ending advancement of gaming technology, I really don't know if we'll ever see another game try to replicate something like this. And since I'm sort of already on this topic, when Altair actually finishes one of his targets, they'll both get a chance to talk to each other mano-a-mano as the Animus's digital reconstruction of the world slowly collapses around them, and they're left in this sort of void of the Animus, or whatever you want to call it. I personally always liked how the Animus turns the simulation down a notch to let these more important conversations play out. And to me, I don't really know how to explain it, but it sort of just made sense that a fairly new device like this would divert its resources or processing power to focus on the more tangential bits of dialogue, since this is a very early model of the device and all. Now, as to why every other machine in the franchise does the same exact thing in every other one of the games, that I don't have an answer for. I assume it was because the developers just simply thought this looked cool, and why not add it in? But I don't really know if that's the reason for certain or not. I'm kind of just speculating here. I will admit, and I know this is a very minor complaint, but I have to say, the inclusion of these things in all the other later games kind of just feels super unnecessary to me. Don't you think as the Animus slowly advances as technology does, the amount of RAM and processing power and just all the other devices a PC has, that this thing also has to just get better and better too? Eventually these things start getting sold to the public in the lore, so they have to advance at least somewhat, right? I'll admit, I'll suspend my belief for a lot of things in this game and this whole entire franchise for that matter, but I draw the goddamn line at the Animus's RAM. Speaking of which, the idea for these scenes partially originated from how Patrice Désolé pitched Altair as someone who quote-unquote kills lovingly, which immediately sparked a question within the group: what does it actually mean to kill lovingly? They ultimately decided that Altair would handle his targets with care instead of brutally mutilating them or something like that. Hence the way he sits next to and comforts his enemy before their demise. It's basically as respectful as one can act after murdering somebody, I suppose. Before Desmond enters the Animus again though, it is explained to him and the player that the reason everything was so jarring a second ago was because his subconscious was rejecting the idea of entering Altair's body, which sounds a little trippy and like a typical bullshit video game way to start the player off at an earlier point in the story, but it also sounds kind of believable due to how Lucy draws the similarities to how some patients have a hard time undergoing hypnotherapy.
DNA functions as an archive. It contains not only genetic instructions passed down from previous generations, but memories as well. The memories of our ancestors.
And the Animus lets you decode and read these DNA files.
Precisely.
But there's a problem. This is the specific memory we're trying to access. Unfortunately, when we try and open the memory, your mind withdraws. You lack the confidence to step into your ancestor's body. That's what happened earlier. You got knocked out of the target memory and pushed back to a more stable state.
Why?
It's your subconscious. It's resisting. We've found similar reactions among patients who undergo hypnosis to relive traumatic events. They can't jump directly into the specific memory. They need to be eased in. Even then, there can be problems.
Once back in control of Altair though, this is when the puppeteering system is finally introduced, which at the end of the day is just a fancy term for the unique control format this game has, but the reason I think it's such a neat concept is because it also sort of acts like a metaphor for reanimating the dead. Each individual button is assigned to one of Altair's limbs, and by pressing and holding the right trigger, the player can alternate from either a low or high profile status, which changes the things that Altair can do to an extent as well. For example, low-profile mode is more stealth-oriented and socially accepted, letting the player walk through and blend into crowds and hiding spots with ease, opposed to how it would go down in high-profile mode. High-profile mode, on the other hand, is way more action-oriented, offering not only faster mobility and the ability to climb to the player, but it also allows them to parkour/free run around instead of just walking as well. The tutorial does a really good job of teaching the players the basics, honestly. There's even a part where it just sort of straight up lays out every single hiding spot in the entire game right in front of you, just to like really beat it into you, which I thought was a tad bit on the nose for my own personal liking, but I mean, everyone learns at different paces, I guess. When the tutorial is over and the game officially starts, players are creatively introduced to the Creed itself, and also reintroduced to Altair in the process. Both Hidden Blade first, as the arrogant assassin sinks his deep into the neck of an innocent man, hence breaking the first tenet of the Creed in the process. The Assassin's Creed is built on 3 distinct principles, also referred to as tenets, that were established to act as a sort of guidance over the actions of every assassin in the order to ensure the mission objectives are met while minimizing any harm to innocent civilians, and more importantly, while also maintaining the secrecy of their order as much as possible, of course. These 3 tenets of the Assassin's Creed are as follows. Stay your blade from the flesh of an innocent, hide in plain sight, and never compromise the Brotherhood. Pretty simple stuff, right? It's honestly a shame these tenets never get as much attention or even a similar introduction for that matter in the later games, because the way they are presented to the player in the very first title is still probably one of my favorite video game sequences of all time. Just because of how well the game eases you into the core concepts of the Creed and overall narrative in the process by making Altair/the player actually break them all single-handedly, and in record time at that. All while his 2 partners are trying their damnedest but just can't get through to Altair due to his absurdly massive ego and downright toxic levels of lordliness on display. Assassin's Creed isn't the first game to ever strip you of power or anything like that. A lot of games in the 2000s were doing things like this, but I feel like it works better in Assassin's Creed than it does in, say, God of War, because here in Assassin's Creed, the player actually participates in the things that gets his rank stripped. Of course, none of the players actually know this is going to happen yet, but I feel like by the game choosing to approach things this way, the consequences of the player's actions feel more tangible, and the stripping of power feels less like some artificial video game bullshit. You see, Altair was granted the rank of Master Assassin within the Creed at the early age of 24, for defending his mentor Al-Mualim from a Templar attack in Masyaf, making him the youngest assassin to ever acquire the status in the Brotherhood. Most assassins usually reach this rank by their late 20s or early 30s, but some other assassins have acquired the rank around Altair's age as well, but that isn't for another few centuries down the line, give or take. The point is, Altair achieving such a glorified reward like this at a young age while also being his mentor's favorite pupil has only seemed to reinforce a lot of these cocky and annoying traits into him and his character as he's gotten older.
It matters not how we complete our task, only that it's done.
But this is not the way
My way is better.
Thankfully, over the course of the story, Altair does end up changing for the better and eventually graduates from this snobby-nosed, self-obsessed student that avoids blame at all costs, to a much wiser and stoic mentor that learns to not only accept his failures, but also the failures of his brothers and of his creed, and to carry on both the teachings of the Brotherhood and of said creed for the rest of his life, for better and for worse, which is a tremendous amount of character development for someone to receive over the course of just one video game, and it's without a doubt the main reason why I think Altair is my favorite protagonist out of the entire batch. No hate on the other guys, of course, but they were just cooking when they wrote this motherfucker. Before a character can triumph, they must fail, and Altair's first true failure occurs on what is arguably the most important mission his master has ever sent him on. He doesn't have all the details, to be fair, but he and his comrades Malik and Qatar were sent to investigate the reports of Templar treasure being held underneath King Solomon's temple. Reports that not only turn out to be true, but the treasure it speaks of even turns out to be the Ark of the Covenant, which follows the biblical references from the beginning of the game while also sort of blurring the lines and interweaving biblical references and conspiracies into the narrative in a way that feels both bold and eerily plausible given the circumstances. Rather than treating religious stories as things that are sacred and untouchable, Assassin's Creed reframes them through the lens of ancient technology and into secret conflicts that didn't make it into the history books, which is honestly something that just really piques my interests, and I don't know why. The game even does it again with the Trojan Wars too, so the writers aren't just having a field day with Christianity or making a bunch of jokes at Christ's expense or anything like that. In this warped perception of things, what were once thought of as miracles then become the effects of advanced artifacts. Prophets and holy figures become individuals who were influenced by pieces of Eden or that happened to possess them or something like that, and divine visions are recast as moments of manipulation or misinterpretation, which the Apple also plays a big part in creating, as far as the first few games go anyway. The writers eventually ditched the Apple in favor of newer devices, of course, but what makes this approach in general so compelling to me is the simple fact that it muddies the water between myth, belief, and conspiracy, until the player is left with exactly what bits and pieces the game wants them to have, and nothing more. The game suggests that the legends we've inherited and the stories that have shaped civilizations for literal centuries now might actually be rooted in something real, but that something real might be far stranger than we originally imagined or interpreted it to be at first. And that marvelous blend of antique mythos, ancient historical settings, and practical science fiction is precisely what makes Assassin's Creed feel like it's operating on a wavelength unlike any other game from its era, and it's part of what makes the experience so unforgettable in my opinion. Robert de Saab is technically the first real-life historical figure the game decides to downright villainize for the sake of the plot, which is a trend the series will follow heavily in its early adolescence as a franchise, but will later try its hardest to shy away from in order to present a much more broader scope of history to the player. Both of which aren't necessarily bad ways of storytelling by any means, but still, one is way more fascinating and the other is way more informative in my opinion. Robert de Saab was the Lord of Sabali, as the subtitle suggests, and the 11th Grand Master of the Knights Templar. He was also the Lord of Cyprus from the years 1191 to 1192, but that doesn't really matter that much as far as the plot for this game is concerned. This is where Assassin's Creed decides to pick things up though, by saying he's not only in charge of the Templars as a whole, but he's actually responsible for another Splinter Cell type of group as well, known as just the Templars, which is honestly a somewhat interesting concept I have to admit. Upon first sight though, Altair immediately guns it for him against his fellow brother's wishes, compromising the mission in the process and, more importantly, the Brotherhood as a whole, which is something Altair will soon face the consequences of when he returns to his mentor Al-Mualim. Speaking of whom, Al-Mualim, the mentor/father figure of Altair in the first Assassin's Creed, is loosely inspired by a real historical figure known as Rashad al-Din Sinan, often referred to as the Old Man of the Mountain, due to how he resided with his order of assassins in a fortress on top of a heavily guarded mountain. Born sometime between 1131 and 1135 in Basra, which is modern-day Iraq, Rashid al-Din Sinan became a prominent leader within the Nizari Ismaili sect of Shia Islam. From 1162 until his death in 1193, he served as the head of the Order of Assassins in Syria, orchestrating political and military actions during a volatile time marked by the first few crusades. He was best known for his strategic brilliance, spiritual influence, and the aura of mystique that surrounded him and his entire order, even earning the attention of Crusader chronicles like William of Tyre, and later, even the fabulous Marco Polo. Though the actual character of Al-Mualim players interact with as Altair is incredibly fictionalized and heavily dramatized for the sake of the story, his philosophical role, strategic command, and connection to the real-life Order of Assassins draws inspiration heavily from who Sinan actually was. Even the choice to simply refer to him as Al-Mualim, which just means the teacher in Arabic by the way, reflects the game's interest in recontextualizing real-world individuals into thematic archetypes. This approach is possibly one of Assassin's Creed's most compelling strengths. It doesn't just name-drop historical figures for novelty. In most cases, it often reimagines them and uses these real people as characters to enrich the story. For many players, these games serve as the first time they ever hear the names of people like Rashad al-Din, Sinan, Leonardo da Vinci, or maybe even Socrates, not in textbooks at school, but through interactive, story-driven experiences. And I myself have even fallen into that category once or twice before, despite how fascinated with history I already am. And you know, I'm not ashamed to admit that. That's the power of Assassin's Creed. That alone makes this franchise remarkable in my opinion. It can turn history into something you actively explore and question until your heart's content, rather than something you simply memorize for a graded essay or for an end-of-the-week or end-of-the-year test. When Altair finally arrives back in Masyaf though, he runs into a troubling yet familiar face.
Ah, he returns at last.
Abbas.
Where are the others? Did you ride ahead hoping to be the first one back? I know you are loath to share the glory. Silence is just another form of assent.
Have you nothing better to do?
I bring word from the Master. He waits for you in the library. Best hurry. No doubt you're eager to put your tongue to his boot.
Another word and I'll put my blade to your throat.
There'll be plenty of time for that later, brother.
This is Abbas. He was once Altair's childhood best friend, but now he's turned into Altair's immortal rival, and the game literally never explains why to the player at all, which is one place where the story fumbles the ball pretty bad, I won't lie. If you want to know why Altair and Abbas hate each other so much, you need to read the official tie-in book that was written a few years after this game came out, titled Assassin's Creed The Secret Crusade, written by Oliver Bowden. Or, you know, you could wait for Assassin's Creed Revelations, but they don't even really tell you the whole thing there either. It's not a bad book by any means, it just seems to be a sort of a novelization of this game and the PS Vita game's story, along with a few other minor stories told in between for world-building's sake, but I wouldn't go as far as to say the book is a necessary read, or even that it enhances the story now that I've read it. I'd also argue the fact that Altair and Abbas' story is even told in this book at all suggests that it was either cut from this game entirely or wasn't even written yet. Your guess is as good as mine. The reason Abbas hates Altair so much is a little complicated, but I'll try my best to explain it as fast as possible really quick. Basically, when the pair were still children, both of their fathers were sent to spy on Saladin for Al-Mualim, but unfortunately, during this secret mission, Altair's father had to kill one of Saladin's generals in order to escape. As a result of this, Saladin captured Abbas's father and threatened to behead him unless Altair's father surrendered himself and took his place. Altair's father accepted his fate and donated his son to Al-Mualim in his absence, since Altair had nowhere else to go because of his mother's death in childbirth. And if you thought that was sad, it literally only gets sadder. After Abbas's father was returned to the Brotherhood though, he felt really guilty for costing Altair his dad. So, in the middle of the night one night when Altair was still a boy, he quietly snuck into Altair's room, woke him up, apologized, and then ended his own life in front of Altair's eyes. Which is just like, holy shit, dude. Once Al-Mualim learned of this, he ordered Abbas and Altair to become students of the Creed, and that Altair never tell Abbas of his father's dishonorable deeds. Altair listens to this command for a while, but as the two grow into teenagers, and Abbas grows sadder and sadder after years of wondering where his father went, Altair finally caves and decides to tell him, hoping it would end his suffering. But instead, Abbas only thinks he's lying, and it causes Abbas to grow into this hateful and resentful version of himself that we see today. They never do get any chance to reconcile their differences or ever get any closer than they were before that day all those years ago. I mean, it's not a bad story by any means, but it does kinda suck that the fans had to wait a few years and to purchase a whole other form of media just to learn about it. And that's coming from someone who actually likes to read books unironically. I know Abbas doesn't really end up playing a huge role, or any role for that matter, inside the franchise, but they went as far as to introduce him here, so they could have at least explained him a little more and why he hates Altair so much. Future games do flesh him out a little more, like I said, thankfully, but still. After Altair finishes speaking with Abbas, he makes his way to Al-Mualim to inform him of his failures. But before he can be punished for his harmful actions, he must help his brothers defend the castle and eventually perform a leap of faith.
Our discussion will have to wait.
The leap of faith is arguably another one of the most iconic motifs inside the entire Assassin's Creed franchise, making its quiet but striking debut during the chaos of Robert de Saab's surprise invasion of Masyaf, which is, and I know I've said this a lot already, another one of my favorite moments in the entire game, as well as the height/climax of the tutorial. With Templar forces now inside the fortress walls and panic beginning to spread among the people, the player is led to and must participate alongside with fellow assassins as they prepare to leap from a towering structure into what appears to be certain death. At least it would be in the real world anyway. But instead of falling to their demise, they disappear seamlessly into a neatly piled haystack far below, simultaneously springing out for a counterattack in the process. And it's another one of those climactic moments that subtly introduces a core principle of the Assassin's Brotherhood, which is the trust in both skill and ideology over all other tools at one's disposal. The leap of faith is presented as a ritual act rooted deep within the assassin's identity in the first game. It embodies their willingness to surrender control from themselves and to trust wholly in their training, and most importantly, in the creed itself. The name is also no coincidence. To leap from great heights without hesitation, it does require absolute conviction in the literal sense as well. Perhaps the craziest part about this section, however, is that this was actually inspired by a real-life historical event/legend that has lived on for over 700 years. I know that can technically be said about most of the things inside this game, but this case is a little different from the others, and I'll try my best to explain real quick. You see, in the book titled The Travels of Marco Polo, written by this guy, there's a famous, albeit most likely heavily embellished for the sake of drama, a story of Marco Polo hearing about the assassins and their leader, the Old Man of the Mountain. Now, according to Polo's account, this fanatical devotion each member of this ancient order had meant that they were willing to obey any command given to them by their master, including ones that meant throwing themselves from high towers or jumping to their deaths just to prove their loyalty to the Old Man of the Mountain. Which is something apparently he actually had them do in order to prove this to Marco Polo during his visit in 1272, or so the legend goes anyway. I guess we'll never really know for sure, but I mean this is what Marco Polo wrote down in his book, or rather he had someone write down for him, but you know what I mean. Normally I wouldn't go so far out of my way to bring up something like this that might not even be remotely true, but I feel like I had to at least let players know the history that inspired this specific scene, because not only does it give this scene an extra layer of context, but the actual way Assassin's Creed takes this legend and remixes it into the plot is so damn well that I think it deserves as many flowers as it can get, like genuinely. It's a very low-key way of merging things from the real world into this fantastical tale of a medieval morality that you don't really see too often in the realm of video games, and I honestly wish more games and writers of these kind of games had the balls to do stuff like this today. Mechanically speaking, however, the leap of faith is solely what allows players to safely descend from any one of the numbers of towering viewpoints they'll find themselves standing upon. Each leap is clearly very carefully choreographed, with the camera tilting, the music hushing up for a second, an eagle crying out overhead, and the assassin's body even curves and cuts gracefully through the air before vanishing into a multitude of the conveniently placed piles of hay underneath every perch. But as time went on, the leap of faith evolved into a much more visual and thematic emblem of the franchise, appearing in practically every major entry and constantly being recontextualized through a variety of different landscapes and eras. But I have to say, I kinda like how well it's portrayed here in the first game over all the other games, I'm not gonna lie. The future assassins just inherit the ability, it seems like. Hell, Ancio performs it as gracefully as can be at the ripe age of 17 on his way to a Renaissance booty call, for crying out loud. But the maneuver is treated with much more weight and actual thematic purpose here in the first game. It's clearly something that only well-trained assassins can pull off, as suggested by the guy less than 20 feet away from you that did the move at the literal same exact time that you did, but he comes out of the haystack with a broken leg. Little things like that signal back to me as a player that this was something that had to be learned, and it clearly takes a significant amount of skill to actually pull off, even if the player only has to press a few buttons themselves to do it. Plus, it's also the only reason why the assassins were able to mount such a monumental comeback here, essentially making the whole display an elaborate chess move in a game between Al-Mualim and Robert de Saab. Immediately after that, however, players are then thrusted into Altair being disciplined in the courtyard in front of all of his assassin brothers. Al-Mualim's punishment for Altair following the failed mission at Solomon's Temple is a defining moment that kind of reverberates through the rest of the narrative to an extent. From a gameplay perspective, this moment is obviously the narrative trying to justify the gradual reacquisition of both the player's tools and skills, but thematically, this also sort of mirrors the game's deeper want to explore concepts like authority, blind obedience, and self-realization, which are things Altair and the player are about to become more and more familiar with over the course of this game than they probably ever imagined. Eventually, they learn that everything was actually an incredibly strategic sequence of events where Altair is nothing more than a weapon sent to eliminate Al-Mualim's opponents, which is damn near Emperor Palpatine levels of evil scheming, but I'm getting way ahead of myself here. We're nowhere near the end yet. The last thing the player sees before this scene is over and they're thrusted out of Altair's shoes and out of the Animus entirely, though, is the blade Al-Mualim was holding into Altair's lower abdomen.
He's experiencing a far better adoption rate than the other subjects.
I'm still pulling him out. He's been in there way too long.
No, not yet. We're still so far from where we need to be.
We shouldn't risk it.
What's another hour or two?
Why don't we discuss this in the conference room? Give Desmond a minute to stretch his legs.
I really don't see the need.
Warren, please.
Fine.
Immediately after Al-Mualim's harsh punishment of Altair, the narrative shifts from the somewhat vibrant 12th century vignettes we're used to this cold, sterile mixture of white and gray interiors that decorate Abstergo Industries. This is also when the player and Desmond are actually allowed to explore their surroundings for the first time. Albeit there's not really much you can do, but if you decide to go to the bathroom located in Desmond's bedroom/prison cell, you can actually eavesdrop on this conversation Warren and Lucy are having about you, which discusses how Desmond's prolonged exposure to the Animus could be somewhat dangerous for the both of them. This is also the part of the game where Lucy openly starts looking out for Desmond, even if he or the player doesn't quite pick up on it just yet. Another conversation between Desmond and Lucy can even be sparked that talks about Desmond's past and his parents.
So you're really an assassin? Like Altair?
Yes and no.
What do you mean?
I was supposed to be one, but I ran away from the farm when I was 16.
Farm?
Yeah, that's what they called the place where I grew up. The farm. Like Messiah, I guess. Only not so, creepy. Just a small community in the middle of nowhere. About 30 of us, living, off the grid.
Why?
Thought my parents were just crazy hippies, trying to stick it to the man, My dad was always going on about our enemies, how they'd be looking for us, how we'd have to be prepared. No one ever came. Nothing ever happened.
Why'd you run away?
I could never leave the compound. You have any idea what it feels like being trapped in a place, knowing there was a whole world out there I'd never get to see?
Don't you miss your parents?
No. As far as I'm concerned, they weren't my parents. They were my wardens, and I was their prisoner.
It sounds like they only wanted to protect you.
With all that's happened, I don't know. I guess they were right.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to dredge up the past.
It's alright. Gives me something to think about.
Try and get some sleep. We've got a long day ahead of us tomorrow.
It's nothing too crazy, I'll admit, but it's still the beginning of a bond that only grows stronger as the story goes on. And this information sort of fills in a few blanks about Desmond's past and draws similarities to Altair and his upbringing all at the same time, which I thought was pretty cool. Another missable interaction between the two can even explain how Abstergo actually found Desmond before he was abducted, with Lucy even trying her damnedest to say that Abstergo might be the Templars, but Desmond doesn't quite pick up on that just yet.
Got a question for you before I turn in.
Sure.
How did they find me? I mean, I haven't been anywhere near another assassin for 10 years.
Use your real name?
Nope. Not before today.
Credit cards?
Cash only.
Telephone?
There's no one to call.
Driver's license?
Motorcycle. Guilty pleasure.
There's your answer. Photo, fingerprint.
This is a drug company. What does Abstergo have to do with the DMV?
Desmond, these guys are everywhere. I'm sorry, I really can't talk about it.
Perhaps the talk he has with Warren Vidic the following morning was a clearer signal, though. I'd argue any speech a man gives me after I wake up to him standing over me is going to stick with me, but I mean, who am I to judge at the end of the day?
Gotta say, that's a little creepy, Doc. Waking up to you standing over me? You been watching me sleep?
We're always watching you. Now get up. We've got a lot of work to do.
Ooh, wonder who I get to kill today.
Don't be so cavalier. Your ancestors almost had the right idea, Mr. Miles. If the deaths of a few people, evil people, no less, could save the lives of thousands more, well, it seems a small sacrifice.
What do you mean, almost?
They didn't go far enough. To use a rather tired analogy, corruption is no different than cancer. Cut out the tumors, but fail to treat the source and, well, you're buying time at best. There's no true change to be had without comprehensive, systemic intervention.
Chemo for the masses.
Education, re-education, to be more precise. But it's not easy, and it doesn't always take.
Let me guess. You've got a better solution. What is it then?
Now that would be telling.
I think the best part about this speech, though, is that he's not really wrong here. Desmond may laugh and call his grand plan to quote-unquote chemo for the masses, but the truth of the matter is that the only way to truly change a system for the better, you have to be willing to do as much of the dirty work as possible. Warren compares corruption to a disease like cancer, and I don't really think he's all that wrong in that assessment. The real world has already proven more than enough times that the actions of a few selfish and greedy individuals can put a stop to any and all progress of those who seek to do what's good and beneficial for the people. Which is yet another piece of the pie that makes the Assassins and Templars so compelling as adversaries, in my opinion. At the end of the day, this story just works, because when you boil it down to its most fundamental points, these are just two political factions that refuse to back down from their beliefs, even at the slightest suggestion of change or altercations of what's already been established, which is something that's been going on since the dawn of time, it seems, and is still happening in the 21st century. Both organizations claim to want the same thing, but when you consider how both of them actually behave, it becomes very clear that both just want to achieve their goals in their own way or no way at all. Much like how the Republicans and the Democrats of America behave today. Both parties claim to want what's best for the American people, but the second anyone is presented with some kind of bill that would actually help the people at the expense of a corporation or some kind of government entity, they're usually the first ones to jump at the opportunity to metaphorically put their hand on your shoulder and say, "Oh, but we can't do that, you see. That would mean our lobbyists wouldn't pay us, and we really like money, you see." I'm sure you understand. Jokes aside, I'm sure there are some actual good people in politics who still mean well out there. I don't mean to generalize or anything, but it also doesn't take a genius to see a large majority of them are corrupt in at least one way, shape, or form. Even Warren himself states that the Assassins didn't go far enough in one of his early morning rants to Desmond, suggesting that if given the chance, he wouldn't make the same mistake. But when Desmond pushes back and asks what this grand plan might be, however, Warren starts to backpedal and pivots, suggesting they get back to work. This speech eerily mirrors something Al-Mualim would say too, which I can't help but feel as if was intentional. Warren Vidic dismisses Desmond's protests and skepticism in much the same way that Al-Mualim dismisses Altair's prideful justifications and retorts. In both cases, the protagonist is made to feel small, like they're being stripped of autonomy and forced into servitude of what their superior frames as the quote-unquote greater good. Both men justify their actions under the guise of progress. Al-Mualim tells Altair that his failure jeopardized the entire Brotherhood, and that his regression in rank is necessary to restore that balance. And Vidic, meanwhile, insists that Desmond's unwillingness to participate in the Animus is further hindering the benefit of mankind somehow, and that the secrets buried inside his DNA are far too important to be left untouched. So, you know, he's really kind of just doing him a favor by kidnapping him and holding him here hostage while he experiments on him seemingly to no end, and with a rapidly approaching deadline at that, whatever that may entail. What's really powerful about this parallel, though, is what it reveals to the player, which should be that the ideological conflict between the Assassins and Templars is not as clear-cut or as black and white as it may have first appeared. Most people want to automatically assume Assassin equals good guy and Templar equals bad guy, because I mean, that's just how we've been wired to interpret stories like this from a young age with things like superheroes and supervillains. But if you take a step back and look at things from a more neutralistic perspective, you begin to see that both sides are fundamentally flawed in more than one area. The Assassins wish to instill peace through murder, and the Templars want to enlighten the world by stripping it of free will. Both concepts are practically contradictory of one another. And at this early point in the story, the game is deliberately attempting to blur the line between mentor and captor, between protector and manipulator. And I thought it brilliantly showcases how morally gray both sides can be from a certain angle. If the assassins really fight for freedom, then why does Altair begin his journey under such tight restrictions and with no little information on his targets? And if the Templars truly seek unification and or a new world order, then why do they rely on such brutal, barbaric, and downright authoritarian methods to make that happen? Another YouTuber by the name of Lasers made the brilliant observation in his very own Assassin's Creed retrospective that Desmond is trapped physically but free within himself, and Altair is free physically but trapped within himself, which blew my fucking mind when I first heard that, because I couldn't believe I didn't pick up on that before watching his very well crafted and a thorough video. Once back inside the Animus though, Altair is then awoken to the shock that he is alive. I imagine Al-Mualim used the Apple of Eden to cast that illusion of a public execution the player witnessed earlier, but I don't think it ever really gets stated as factual truth anywhere in the story. I'm just assuming based on the dialogue that follows, and a little bit of dialogue in the later game. Even if it wasn't a bizarre hallucination of some kind though, the premise of it is still all the same. Altair has been stripped of his ranks and forced to do what he views as a bunch of meaningless tasks. In reality, he's granted the opportunity to start his assassin career over again as a novice, which on one hand is a nice way of showcasing to players that assassins actually act with a ton of deliverance, and that despite how Altair previously acted, they don't just automatically get to go out killing for fun. There's even a nice little sequence where players can see all of their blades and upgraded items get removed from their inventory, which I thought was a kind of neat way of sending this fact home to players in video game terms. But on the other hand, I could see how it could make the more conspiratorial players question whether or not Altair has any free will at all, despite being in a literal creed fighting for it. His quote-unquote resurrection was entirely against his will. And let's be honest, do you really think Al-Mualim was just gonna let him say no to this sucking offer to join the Brotherhood? Al-Mualim even has a game plan for Altair as soon as he gets back from whatever cloud he was on. And that's all this is to him. It's just some kind of bizarre, perfect opportunity for Altair to prove his dedication to the Creed, and nothing more. And Altair obviously isn't too happy about this. And perhaps he shouldn't be, but eventually he'll come around. Right now though, he's angry and wants to get it over with as soon as possible, which causes him to want to rush the training just like the player probably does. Remember, this is likely the 4th or 5th tutorial players are now being presented with one after another before the story can advance, and I can't help but feel like this is kind of intentional in one way to help get the players at home better aligned with Altair's motives mentally. Maybe I'm looking too deep into things, this game was kind of assembled very quickly after all, so perhaps this wasn't an intricate scheme to make the player feel abreast with Altair, but with how much thought and dedication went into every other aspect of this game, it kind of leaves me thinking. I can't really come to any precise conclusions, so yet again, your guess is as good as mine. As repetitive as it is though, I'd still argue this tutorial is important for players because it essentially teaches them how they'll be hunting their targets for the rest of the game. Like Altair himself puts it, assassins can pickpocket, use violence to intimidate, and eavesdrop to gather important information on their targets, which are all things Altair/the player must do to complete the tutorial and to find the traitor for Al-Mualim. Al-Mualim already knows who he is of course, but he withheld such information for video game's sake and for the sake of Altair's training. Completing this task, however, also grants Altair the ability to carry a blade once again, and this is arguably where the game truly begins. After Altair is finished finding the traitor though, the first real target Altair must face is a guy by the name of Tamir, the corrupt merchant who reigns over the poor district of Damascus with an iron fist. Assassination targets themselves will work in another strange sort of way here in the first game, but I'll try to explain everything to my best ability really quickly again. So basically, every one of the game's 9 main Templar antagonists/targets each inhabit/operate within a certain district or area of the game's 3 major cities. Each area is also divided up into 3 different zones within the city walls, meaning there's a poor district, a rich district, and a middle-class district, with each one being gradually unlocked over the course of the story. Like I said before, I feel like this is such a unique way to reuse the areas of the game without making it too obvious to the player, since players are only really allowed to run around in one of the 3 per story sequences or memory blocks. It's still technically an open-world map since none of the districts are small by any means necessary, but it's one that constantly expands the more you play the game, sort of like Elden Ring. Plus, the architecture and overall layout changes in each district to make each one of them feel and look fresh as hell when you enter them for the first time. Perhaps the most compelling element to the buildings in Assassin's Creed, however, is the fact that they are all completely interactable from almost any and every way the player can approach them. There are some puzzle aspects to them as well, of course, meaning you can't just simply scale them by holding the joystick up or in a singular direction. You actually have to do a little bit of thinking when climbing them sometimes, and it pays handsomely to memorize what ones are easier to climb, and what specific cracks to look for and what ones to avoid when in a jam. You know, since the game's cities were designed in this kind of a quote-unquote building block arrangement, as the developers over at Ubisoft Montreal put it. The player is bound to run into a repeated design here and there, but granted, you also have to be kind of looking extremely hard to really spot this kind of thing. But hey, if they are paying that much attention, maybe over time, players might even begin to recognize what zone they're in just based on their surroundings alone. Which was actually the intent, by the way, if you remember that original pitch I mentioned earlier. Damascus itself, though, is one of the most beautiful places in the entire game. Right up there next to Jerusalem, in my opinion. I've never been to either places in real life, of course, but goddamn I'd be lying if I said Assassin's Creed doesn't make me want to travel to them one day, just to see if it's as beautiful in real life all these years later as it is here in this digital reconstruction of the past. And not even to mention, the amount of historical authenticity here is astounding. Not only can merchants be seen selling goods at any one of these tables you can jump over, but the markets themselves sell historically accurate goods to consumers as well. Robes and silk from the east, as well as homemade plates and metalworks from local vendors, is mainly what made Damascus such a hot commodity in trade in the actual Crusades. And it's good to see these things get represented in this game, as little and minuscule as this detail may be. Word on the street is that Tamir is making a lot of coin from war profiteering, and is expecting to make one of his biggest sales to date in the city's market this afternoon. So Altair uses this time to strike, presumably while he's too occupied with profits in mind to expect an attack. When Altair eliminates him, though, he learns that Tamir was only one piece of a 9-sided puzzle. In his final moments, he even tries to explain how mistaken and misguided Altair is, but this is long before Altair is willing to question his own ways. The final thing he says to Altair always stuck with me, though.
To know the others soon enough. They won't take kindly to what you've done.
Good. I look forward to ending their lives as well.
Such pride. It will destroy you, child.
I suppose the phrase can apply to many people and characters, but it's also a statement that fits Altair's character perfectly, perhaps a little too well, even for his own liking. Which is probably why this message stood out to him. It was able to cut deep and to sow the seeds of doubt as well. Before Altair can report his success to his mentor, though, Desmond is yanked out of the Animus again by Lucy, much to the dismay of Warden Vidic. And just like always, if you stick around long enough to bug Lucy before heading back to bed, you can learn a few more things. The most important being the deadline that was briefly mentioned, but she also explains why everyone in the Holy Land is speaking proper English as well.
Hey, you know what? I've got a question I think you can actually answer.
What's up?
Why is it that sometimes the guys in there talk like they're from the future?
The future?
I mean the present. Now, today, whatever.
You've probably noticed that English has become the official language of the Holy Land.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
The Animus is translating speech it deems vital into more modern English, so expect a few anachronisms. I could probably make it more authentic, but... You ever read Chaucer?
Who?
Yeah, definitely not for you.
Lucy also tries to answer as many of Desmond's questions as she can about Abstergo before suggesting that he goes and gets some rest. The next morning, however, is filled with more ramblings from Warren, like usual, but this time he lets an important detail slip.
Right.
I still don't see where I fit into things.
In time, Mr. Miles. In time, you'll understand. Or you won't. I don't care either way, as long as you show us where it is.
Where what is?
Sorry I'm late. Ready to go?
Yes, we are.
Before he can elaborate any further, though, Lucy walks in and just like that, Desmond is back in the Animus. I love moments like this because they really give the story that slow burn effect. What he's talking about right now literally won't get brought up again for another few in-game and real-life hours, and when this thread of the plot does finally rear its head again, it's given center stage. Once back inside the Animus, though, Altair informs Al-Mualim of his target's demise, and gets rewarded with the short blade in return. The short blade is honestly probably my favorite weapon in the entire game, just because of how brutal the counter kills are with this thing. I mean, seriously, as someone who grew up ritualistically chainsawing people to death in games like Gears of War, I'm surprised by how much I still cringed at some of these kill animations. The audio bites attached to them really carry the weight a tremendous amount as well. This is also the point in the game where the players get to choose where they want to go and which target they want to pursue. You can either go to Acre for Garnier or Jerusalem for Talal. Garnier de Naplouse is located in Acre, a city where the Holy Wars have certainly left their mark. There are tons of crumbling or partially burned buildings scattered across to this city, and since the war is still going on, and there are already enough problems going on in the city, with the guards harassing all of these random women and elderly men and whatnot, no one has had the time or energy really to get around to repairing them. Granted, this does make for some rather unique parkour and free-running opportunities for the player, but not everyone in the city is running from rooftop to rooftop like you are, so it really does kinda suck for them, you gotta admit. To put it rather bluntly, Acre is a decaying frontier. The filter applied to this city and this land even hints at things like death, fatigue, and is meant to evoke an overall sense of sadness in the player. This is a city that was carved out of ash and salt, now being demolished and torn apart by the disease of war. As a player, you really can't help but want to end the Crusades by any means necessary just to help these people, to put an end to their needless suffering. Even worse, despite all that's going on, Altair gets word that Garnier is experimenting on people like they're nothing more than objects. Garnier is a doctor as well as the 10th Grand Master of the Knights Hospitalier in Acre. When Altair finally confronts the man, he does so right after he's finished breaking a patient's legs who was caught trying to escape from his captivity. After Altair disposes of him though, the words he mutters with such confidence makes Altair question his motives and even his morality a little. So much so that he voices his concerns with both the Rafik in town and Al-Mualim himself once back in Masyaf. But both mentors brush him and his questions under the rug as soon as he asks them. Another thing for players to consider, though, is that despite his rather cruel means of going about it, Garnier is still trying to save these people, technically. He may not have been going about it and doing it in the most ethically way possible, but he's still one of the only men in the entire region who's actually trying to help these people with more nuanced illnesses. Which is also why after his death, so many of these people can be seen wandering the street and getting in Altair's way. The only other person who's attempting to quote-unquote fix the Holy Land is a guy by the name of Talal, nicknamed Talal the Slave Trader on the streets. And he's also Altair's next target, coincidentally enough. Much like Garnier, Talal genuinely wants to help these people around him, but with him kidnapping people from the streets, jails, and whorehouses, as he puts it, it's a little hard for the people of Jerusalem to see things his way. Shocking, right? How could people not have empathy for a slaver? Well, to be fair, Talal probably doesn't know that he's a slaver, and if that sounds a little confusing, let me explain. You see, Talal thought he was being extra clever and flying under the radar, so to speak, by abducting people from nearby cities and then bringing them into Jerusalem. But word has been getting around town of the massive caravans of people coming in and out most nights, which is ultimately how Altair catches wind of his schemes and decides to pay him a visit at one of his very own warehouses in the city of Jerusalem. This encounter doesn't go exactly how the player might expect it to go, however. In fact, Talal is actually the one Templar in the entire game the player doesn't get to hunt. To Altair and maybe even the players a surprise, Talal was expecting us to arrive from the get-go. You can hear his voice echo through the room long before his presence is met by Altair or even the player's eyes, meaning that whole cloak and dagger routine just isn't going to work this time. What follows next, though, is a whole city-wide chase scene where Altair and Talal dash over rooftops and through support beams while guards are being left in the dust left and right, and I have to say, this was low-key a very fun mix-up to play through in terms of a boss fight. Don't get me wrong, the whole social stealth / hiding in plain sight gimmick is fun in itself, but the combat in this game is also so simple and looks so realistic thanks to these neatly choreographed animations that I don't mind engaging with it from time to time at all. It's certainly not flawless or anything like that, nor do I think it could really support the weight of the game if this was the mechanic the developers chose to center the gameplay around, but that doesn't make it any less viable, or just straight up fun to participate in. What Talal says on his deathbed, though, also gives the same sentiment as what Garnier was saying.
Then we are finished. Beg forgiveness from your god.
He's long abandoned us. Long abandoned the men and women I took into my arms.
What do you mean?
Beggars, whores, addicts, lepers. Do they strike you as proper slaves? Unfit for even the most menial tasks? No. I took them not to sell, but to save. And yet you'd kill us all. For no other reason than it was asked of you.
No. You profit from the war, from lives lost and broken.
Yes, you would think that, ignorant as you are. Wall off your mind, eh? They say it's what your kind do best. Do you see the irony in all this? No, not yet, it seems. But you will.
In my eyes, Talal is the ideal Templar. His ideology and his identity are so heavily linked to who he is that he can't see beyond what he's come to accept as the truth. Basically living in a permanent the ends justify the means kind of mindset. And I honestly think it's not a coincidence that the later Templars all seem to mirror him in at least one way or another. The writers really struck a gold here with him, which is kinda crazy to say because on paper he's nothing more than a slave trader. I mean, not only is it incredibly nuanced for an action-adventure game to tackle the subject of slavery in the first place, especially in the year 2007 at that, but the historical accuracy on display here is also kind of insane. There's specifically a moment where Altair is making his way through Talal's secret warehouse and a prisoner reaches out from underneath him begging him to help. And I mean, not only is this just like really fucked up in general, having cells in the floors, but this is something people actually did back in the day. Ancient archaeological studies and records from places like Tyr have proved that there were in fact buildings designed like this that presumably belonged to the people who kept the slave market afloat. And what really caught my eye about this whole thing is that the game doesn't just stop and say slavery is bad. It attempts to go the extra mile by making Talal try and justify it to Altair. And although it's monumentally unlikely that the player is actually going to see things his way, I still respect the narrative for allowing him the opportunity to make his point. He phrases his actions as giving these people order instead of what he's actually doing, which is robbing them of choice. He claims that some men are weak and others are doomed to wander with no purpose forever, and he's willing to be the one person to give them that purpose, through things like order. He even makes a point to highlight to Altair that he takes in beggars, whores, addicts, and lepers all, claiming not to want to sell them into slavery but to save them from the traps of society, which is an interesting way of looking at things, I'll admit. I guess whether or not he's actually planning on selling them is up for interpretation, but one thing is for certain. Altair killing him may have saved the ones he's kidnapped now, but it's also dooming them to return to a world that will never care about them as much as Talal did. And that's how you write a villain. Although his means weren't ethical, his intent was still somewhat pure, which is why I kinda sit at this moral crossroads with his character as a whole. And it's why I think he's one of the best villains/bosses in the entire game, just because of how ideologically nuanced he is for a 2007 video game. He even says at one point that slavery is just something the world does, which suggests to me that he'd probably be doing something else if he thought it was a more efficient way to make money. I don't think that makes him any better of a person for practicing slavery, mind you, let that be clear, but I do feel like it's important to highlight that Talal isn't doing this out of some malicious or racial intent or something like that. He just sees this as a necessary but unfortunate step towards his inevitable goal. The biggest flaw in his line of thinking, though, is how he casts judgment onto others like it's nothing. Apart from the whole slavery stuff, this is the main reason why I can't fully align myself with someone like Talal. Because at what point is it ever enough, you know? Sure, it may be easy for someone like me or you to cast judgment on someone who is homeless right now and to think that they need saving from the situation they're currently in, but someone above mine and your tax bracket could easily make the same assumption of you or anyone who makes less money than them. In fact, I'd even go as far as to bet there's a really strong chance that someone who watches this video right now would scoff at the current living situation I'm in, and or the amount of money I bring in every year. That's just how it is. Some people will judge you for that kind of thing and others won't. It's the way of the world, unfortunately. The only difference between the people in the real world and the followers of the Assassins and Templars, though, is that the people in the real world who run the world aren't so concerned with liberating me from my prison like these groups are, which really makes you stop and consider how the actual people they're trying to save feel about these matters. I also believe this is one of the key things that led Altair and eventually Ancio into expanding upon the Creed's catchphrase, "Nothing is true, everything is permitted." Instead of living by it like a code or something, they eventually use it to help them see the world around them better.
You mentioned a creed before. What is it?
Nothing is true. Everything is permitted.
That is rather cynical.
It would be if it were doctrine, but it is merely an observation of the nature of reality. To say that nothing is true is to realize that the foundations of society are fragile, and that we must be the shepherds of our own civilization. To say that everything is permitted is to understand that we are the architects of our actions, and that we must live with their consequences, whether glorious or tragic.
This kind of discussion could go on for the rest of the video, but I think you get what I was trying to say. A wise man once said, "He who is without sin may cast the first stone." Upon Altair's return, though, He's criticized for his very open approach to assassinating Talal, and to my honest surprise, Altair doesn't try to justify his actions here, nor does he try to come up with another petty excuse like he did at the start of the game. Even though Talal was totally expecting him and there's nothing he could really do about that, he doesn't try to mouth off to Malik or anything of that sort. He just accepts this as fact and looks at things from a more, yeah, the job probably could have went smoother, but hey, at least our side is up now, right? Kind of view, which is far more tolerable than his arrogant, egotistical side he displayed at the start of the game. Before Altair has a chance to make his way back to Masyaf, though, the player is thrusted back into Desmond's shoes while Lucy tries her best to fix the Animus's overheating issue. During this time, he can also ask her some more questions and hear some more important admissible dialogue.
Why is he always yelling at you? It's his machine.
His theories. He's not the one who built it.
Who did? You?
No. Abstergo has a team of engineers. Not much they don't have. But I did oversee the assembly. Guess that's why he gets so angry with me.
He's a dick.
He's under a lot of pressure. We all are.
Can't believe you're defending the guy.
Warren saved my life, so if he wants to yell a little, let him.
What do you mean he saved your life?
You're not the only one who doesn't get to go home at night.
Wait, are you saying you're a prisoner?
When they first approached me, I was finishing up my PhD. The university had made it clear I had no future there. They didn't like the subject of my doctorate, called it pseudoscience. Said keeping me on would discredit and embarrass them. It was the same everywhere. Other universities, companies I interviewed with. Pretty soon I was out of money and out of time. I was this close to waiting tables. Then I got a letter.
From Vidic?
He said he'd been following my career since undergrad, that he believed in my work and wanted to meet to discuss my future. You have no idea how good it felt to hear that. So I met with him. What did I have to lose?
And he offered you a job?
Yes, here at Abstergo, helping out on the Animus project. I'd have a chance to test my theories and prove the professors wrong. How could I turn that down?
Think I'm missing the part where you became a prisoner.
Sometimes I wonder if they weren't behind it all. If they manipulated events so that I'd get desperate. They can do that. They can do anything. I didn't think when I agreed to come here. They even told me I'd be trapped. For 6 months, a year max. Once the product launched, there'd be no need for secrecy anymore. But until then, I'd be a guest of the company. At least, that's what they said.
And when the Animus was ready?
They came in while I was sleeping. 3 guys. Guns. They dragged me out of bed. God. The worst part is I knew them. One guy, Richard, we ate lunch together sometimes. And now he was gonna... They were cracking jokes. I tried to pull away. He hit me. And that's when he told me I was going to die.
Christ, what did you do?
Nothing. I kept telling myself it wasn't real. And then Warren was there, shouting at them to get away from me. And they listened.
Jesus.
He's not a happy man, Desmond. I wouldn't even say he's a good man, but he saved my life. They never came for me again, and he promised they never would.
You're still stuck here working for these nut jobs.
But I'm alive. Anyway, I really do need to get the Animus repaired. I'll see you tomorrow, Desmond.
This conversation always enthralled me because it humanizes one of the lead antagonists in such a good way, and it comes completely out of left field, presumably catching the player off guard with its presentation. The best part about it too is that it doesn't try to just flip the script or completely deify him or anything like that either. Even Lucy says,
"He's not a happy man, Desmond. I wouldn't even say he's a good man, but he saved my life."
Which brings me to the other reason why I love all these little bits and pieces of conversation, and especially this one in particular. It just leaves so much up for interpretation on the player's end. I mean, I'm literally dissecting maybe 4 or 5 sentences right now, and still. And I don't know, it feels like you could speculate on these matters for hours upon hours, perhaps even dedicate whole videos to them in general, like I'm sure many people already have. Like how Lucy said she knew one of her kidnappers and that she ate lunch with him one time. What's up with that? As far as I'm aware, the game never really elaborates any further than that, but at the same time, it doesn't really need to give you an answer, it just needs you thinking about this scenario. The whole goal here was to get the player questioning things, like most of the dialogue in this game is, I suppose, but I can't stop myself from being amazed with how much they're actually able to provoke, all the while saying so little. The conversations in this game feel genuine in that way, in a way that the franchise never really tries to replicate in the future for some reason. And that's the real funny thing. Despite looking like absolute cardboard cutouts, these characters feel just as real as any other character in a piece of media to me. Another thing that kinda caught my ear was how Lucy insinuates that Abstergo may have been pulling the strings all along. They can do that, you know. They can do anything, she says. And considering how you and her are both prisoners in this top secret facility of theirs, it doesn't really sound that hard to imagine. Why would Abstergo ever treat its employees any differently than Desmond? They just want control over the masses. They'll even admit it to you openly themselves, like Warren does the next morning in Desmond's room. He even goes a step further, claiming that nearly every technological, medicinal, or scientific advancement in the past 10 years, or that we know of today, came from the people who represent Abstergo, which Desmond calls bullshit on almost immediately, but then Warren lets another small detail slip in his boastful monologue.
Isn't it obvious? It means we're in control.
But how? What makes you guys so special, so smart? That you happen to invent all these things while us mere mortals stumble around like idiots?
To be fair, we don't invent them. We find them.
Find them?
They're gifts, Mr. Miles. From those who came before. We'll have to continue this discussion later. Time's wasting.
This isn't the first time the Isu or signs of a precursor race have been hinted at in the story, of course, but as the game nears its end, they become more and more present, as you might have expected. Now, I know there's a lot of murky water surrounding the discussion of the Isu online, so I'm not even going to attempt to sift through the college textbook levels of lore there is online about them in order to justify them being in the games, or to try to make you see them any differently than you may already. The truth of the matter is, you either love them or you hate them. They're either something you deem essential to your enjoyment of the story, or they're something you just brush over and look at your phone at while you're busy waiting for the killing and the parkour. I always liked the sci-fi elements of Assassin's Creed, so I never really scoffed at their inclusion, but holy shit. If you read some of the things I've seen online, you'd probably be surprised at how many people want the writers to just leave this thread of the plot behind and forget it ever happened. I personally don't agree with this line of thinking for a number of reasons, but perhaps the main one is because I once read a quote from Darby McDevitt, future lead writer of the franchise, where in it he explains that the Isu weren't something the writers had fully thought out from the get-go. In fact, it was actually him that attempted the thankless task of unifying the Isu and their lore into something that still holds meaning in a world that is forever changing at an accelerating rate. Immediately after the team got finished working on Assassin's Creed Revelations, he reportedly gathered them all together and pitched his idea to them, claiming that if everyone just used the first civilization as whatever they wanted for story's sake, the franchise's story will start to get misconstrued and disjointed very quickly. And for what it's worth, he was right to an extent. He didn't work on Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and that game is living proof that the Isu can be overused as a plot device and demystified because of it if you're not too careful. The other reason I don't think the series should abandon this storyline, though, is because Assassin's Creed was originally meant to be, and always will be, a sci-fi story. Patrice Désolé reportedly brought up Arthur C. Clarke's Third Law a lot when designing things like the Apple of Eden, which is the idea that any significantly advanced technology is almost indistinguishable from magic, implying that to a less technologically developed observer, highly advanced technology appears almost supernatural, like when those assholes use drones to observe the tribes of the Sentinelese people on a North Sentinel island. Despite the practice being highly illegal, it doesn't stop anybody from actually doing it, and you can only imagine what they think that annoying little hovering turd in the sky actually is, but that's beside the point. The law is used here to suggest that what may seem impossible today may not be so impossible in the future, meaning that with that theory or lens, so to speak, one could look back at the past and see these historic or religious artifacts as high-tech gadgets, perhaps from those who walked the earth before humans. It's just like if the world were to abruptly end today from a nuke or something like that, and then these new-age nuclear cavemen were to find one of our smartphones or other day-to-day devices. I also just really liked how these advanced artifacts are credited, or blamed rather, for starting things like the Trojan Wars or even creating the quote-unquote a myth of Christianity. The idea that these various recollections of past events or origins of religion may be misinterpreted and or are accidentally being disregarded is a highly interesting concept, even if Assassin's Creed wasn't the first one to actually bring it up. When players step back into the Animus, however, they are met with Altair informing Almo-Alim of his success, and Almo-Alim informs him of King Richard's approach in return, as he is most likely emboldened by his recent victory at Acre. This is also where Altair is given 3 more targets, as well as the Catch Ledge ability, which is honestly so damn integral to parkour, I have no idea why you have to wait until around halfway through the game to unlock it. Grab breaks are also unlocked, but if I'm being frank with you, enemies only ever attempt to grab you in this game once in a blue moon. It is an upgrade to the combat mechanics available to the player though, I suppose, so maybe I shouldn't be complaining. Maybe I'm just spoiled by the incredibly overpowered counter kill ability that still one-shots enemies for the time being. Following that though, players are yet again allowed to pick which targets to pursue next, and therefore I have no idea if the next 3 targets in this script are supposed to be tackled in this order or not. And I really don't feel like rewriting this part again, so I'm sorry, you just gotta deal with it. Abul is another interesting Templar in my opinion. Altair confronts him at a party he throws for his people in the rich district of Damascus, a party where he poisons most of the attendees out of his own deep and personal hatred for them. You see, Abul is horribly disfigured, perhaps by a skin condition he's had since birth or something. The game never really outright explains it, but regardless. This, the fact that he's been stealing money from the people and embezzling it into his own ventures, and some of his other unholy hobbies have caused the people to quietly resent him. Their cruel words and harsh comments they speak in secret have cut Abul deeper than any knife ever could. So much so that he doesn't even like to leave his house that much anymore. Which was probably the first sign that something was up about this house party. I think the writers are also subtly trying to hint at him being a homosexual as well, but I don't want to outright say that for certain because I'm not 100% sure. I don't know, it was just the way he caresses this guy's face while talking about a perfect world, and the fact that he thinks he's an abomination in the eyes of the Christian God are what really made me think this, but I could just be overanalyzing things. He, like many targets that have come before him, also suggests that Altair and him are one and the same, and I think the decision to make one of the most visually distinct Templars talk about how you are one and the same was a clever justification, honestly. He and Altair may differ widely in appearance and background, but they both share a similar philosophy at the end of the day, and both men can respect each other because of that. Believe it or not though, Altair is so conflicted with this information that this is also the point in the game where he finally speaks up and asks Al-Mualim about these strange connections and words these men have been saying.
Word has reached me of your success. You've my gratitude and that of the realm. Freeing these cities from their corrupt leaders will no doubt promote the cause of peace.
Can you really be so sure?
The means by which men rule are reflected in their people. As you cleanse the cities of corruption, you heal the hearts and minds of those who live within.
Our enemies would disagree.
What do you mean?
Each man I've slain has confessed strange words to me. They are without regret. Even in death they seem confident of their success. Though they do not admit it directly, there is a tie that binds them. I'm sure of it.
There is a difference, Altair, between what we are told to be true and what we see to be true. Most men do not bother to make the distinction. It is simpler that way. But as an assassin, it is your nature to notice, to question.
Then what is it that connects these men?
But as an assassin, it is also your duty to still these thoughts and trust in your master. For there can be no true peace without order. And order requires authority.
You speak in circles, Master. You commend me for being aware, then ask me not to be. Which is it?
The question will be answered when you no longer need to ask it.
I assume you called me here for more than just a lecture.
Very well. A rank and weapon are again restored.
Although nothing gets revealed just yet, this is a pivotal moment for Altair and his character, one that showcases he is no longer the obedient assassin he once was. He's now beginning to look at things differently, and ask questions that highlight the cracks in the foundation of the creed itself. Altair's next target is William de Montferrat, and he has been stationed to govern an acre awaiting the return of his trusted ally, King Richard. Now, King Richard, or Richard the Lionheart as he was commonly known by, was the actual King of England from 1189 until his death in 1199. And with Assassin's Creed being set in 1191, that means he's technically in power when both Altair gets to look at him here in Acre and when he meets him again later during the Siege of Arsuf. He was also the second monarch of the House of Plantagenet, and a commander in the Crusader army during the Third Crusade, although I'd argue the latter of those is far more obvious. Perhaps what I also think is pretty noteworthy about William of Montferrat is that in real life, his son Conrad, who also had a historic hatred and numerous political disagreements with King Richard himself, was actually killed by the Order of Assassins, and the order was given by the real-life Al-Mualim. To put an incredibly long story short, At one point during the Third Crusade, presumably sometime in 1191, Conrad and his troops seized a ship that was carrying a bunch of food for the people of Acre, slayed the crew mercilessly, and took it and the treasure it was carrying for themselves. Little did he know, though, this ship belonged to the Assassins, meaning he was now an official enemy of the Order. Many months went by without any signs of threat, however. That was until one fateful day in April of 1192. As the legend goes, Conrad had entered the city of Tyre, and as he did, two of who he thought was his close friends/fellow soldiers called out to him from an alleyway. After Conrad entered the alleyway, though, they both produced daggers from their garbs and started viciously stabbing him to death before running off, never to be seen again. These quote-unquote soldiers were none other than assassins who had spent these last few months befriending Conrad in order to get him to lower his guard, and as soon as he did, they struck. I know this might not seem like a big deal, but this actually had huge political ramifications on pretty much everyone who knew Conrad, for the courts of England had even accused King Richard himself of having something to do with the whole affair because of how he and Richard had an open distaste for each other. King Richard apparently even reached out to Rashad al-Sinan himself and asked him to prove that it wasn't him that killed Conrad, to which Rashad sent a letter to the European courts explaining that he took out Conrad and that it wasn't on the behalf of King Richard the Lionheart, which ultimately led to the king's innocence in the eyes of England. Back to the game, though. Once King Richard appears here, he does so in a spectacular fashion, and then immediately belittles William in front of all of his men, which really pisses him off, and Altair sees this as the perfect opportunity to strike, while he's brooding in his castle. I will say, one critique I have about the actual assassination target mission itself is the fact that it feels like it was heavily designed with the air assassination ability in mind, despite that ability not really being in this game, or at least not being able to be done as easily in this game as it is in the later games. I know you can technically still do it by lining up a jump, but that's far more inconvenient than just jumping down there and fighting them all head on, in my opinion. During his final moments, though, Altair learns that he was intending on liberating Acre and giving the city back to its people, which is a stark contrast to what Altair was told he was going to do. William talks of the irony of Altair's actions, and he's technically right. The more astute players may have already realized that ever since Garnier died, his patients have now taken to roaming the streets and will even push Altair if he gets too close to them. This is such a great way of showing the player they're actively hurting the cities they wish to help. Now the streets are flooded with these NPCs, and it's harder to traverse them too. It's a nice visual and mechanical way of saying the player is fucking up. This and a number of other revelations, I imagined, are more than enough to make Altair demand answers from Almoim in their next meeting, but no longer having the patience to simply want or ask them.
Come, Altair. I would have news of your progress.
I've done as you've asked.
Good, good. I sense your thoughts are elsewhere. Speak your mind.
Each man I'm sent to kill speaks cryptic words to me. Each time I come to you and ask for answers. Each time you give only riddles in exchange, but no more.
Who are you to say no more?
I'm the one who does the killing. If you want it to continue, you'll speak straight with me for once.
Tread carefully, boy. I do not like your tone.
And I do not like your deception.
I have offered you a chance to restore your lost honor.
Not lost. Taken. By you. And then you've sent me to fetch it again like some damn dog.
It seems I'll need to find another. A shame. You showed great potential.
I think if you had another, you'd have sent him long ago. You said the answer to my question would arise when I no longer needed to ask it. So I will not ask. I demand you tell me what binds these men.
What you say is true. These men are connected by a blood oath not unlike our own.
Who are they?
Non nobis, domine non nobis.
Templars.
Now you see the true reach of Robert de Sade.
All of these men, leaders of cities, commanders of armies.
All pledge allegiance to his cause.
Their works are not meant to be viewed on their own, are they? But as a whole, what do they desire?
Conquest. They seek the Holy Land not in the name of God, but for themselves.
What of Richard? Salah-ad-Din?
Any who oppose the Templars will be destroyed. Be assured they have the means to accomplish it.
Then they must be stopped.
That is why we do our work, Altair. To ensure a future free of such things.
Why did you hide the truth from me?
That you might pierce the veil yourself. Like any task, knowledge precedes action. Information learned is more valuable than information given. Besides, Your recent behavior had not inspired much confidence.
I see.
Altair, your mission has not changed. Merely the context within which you perceive it.
And armed with this knowledge, I might better understand those Templars that remain.
Is there anything else you want to know?
What about the treasure Malik retrieved from Solomon's temple? Robert seemed desperate to have it back.
In time, Altair, all will become clear. Just as the role of the Templars has revealed itself to you, so too will the nature of their treasure. For now, take comfort in the fact that it is not in their hands, but ours.
If this is your desire.
It is. You are restored another rank. Take back your weapon. Use it to bring honor to the Brotherhood. Altair, before you go...
Yes?
How did you know I wouldn't kill you?
Truth be told, Master, I didn't. I took a leap of faith.
This has always been one of my favorite interactions between Altair and Al-Mualim, solely because of what Altair said at the end. Technically speaking, he's already given his body to the Creed with his ring finger missing and all, but this is a whole new level of trusting the Creed. Now Altair's are doing so on an ideological level too, literally putting his life on the line in the search of the truth. Of course, Al-Mualim only gives him a fraction of it, like always, but like I said earlier, the game loves to drip feed important information like this to you. Maj Adin, on the other hand, is different from every one of the previous Templars the player and Altair have encountered thus far. For starters, he doesn't try to justify any of his actions in his final moments for a change. He just gloats about the feeling of taking human life in front of a crowd, and about how he was only really in this whole Templar thing for the power anyhow, so he doesn't feel any remorse for his actions. All the more fitting to have this newfound Altair humble him in that case.
Away your evil deeds.
The Brotherhood wanted the city. I wanted power. There was an opportunity.
An opportunity to murder innocents.
Not so innocent. Dissident voices cut deep as steel. They disrupt order. In this, I do agree with the Brotherhood.
You'd kill people simply for believing differently than you.
Of course not. I killed them because I could. Because it was fun. Do you know what it feels like to determine another man's fate? And did you see the way the people cheered? The way they feared me? I was like a god. You'd have done the same if you could. Such power.
Once perhaps. But then I learned what becomes of those who lift themselves above others.
And what is that?
Here, let me show you.
Before Altair can ride back to Masyaf, however, the player is ripped out of the Animus again and placed back in Desmond's shoes, this time to a much more alarmed Warren Vidic.
We done already?
Get up.
Whatever you say, Doc.
I'm ending the session. No, I'll be right there. You're sure about this? Yes. No. Everything's Denver. I don't see how he could... Of course. I understand. You're in a lot of trouble, Mr. Miles.
What's his problem?
They're coming for you.
Who's coming for me?
Assassins.
Hey, I had nothing to do with this.
Sounds like they're mounting some kind of rescue attempt. Guess you're more important than you realized.
Man, things just keep getting weirder and weirder around here.
It was bound to happen.
What do you mean?
That little fight your ancestor started during the Third Crusade, it never ended. You're being held by Templars.
Vidic's a Templar?
There's no way you could have known. They hide it so well. But to answer your question, Vidic works for them. We all do. Abstergo is their company.
I thought Templars were old dudes with funny hats who sat around drinking beer and plotting world domination with, like, the lizard people.
No. Except the part about world domination, I guess. Look, Desmond, it's complicated. Half the stuff they say about the Templars comes from crazy tinfoil hat-wearing nutjobs. The other half is misinformation intentionally produced by the Templars themselves.
But they are the bad guys, right?
If there's one thing I've learned since I started working here, it's that there's no such thing. It's all so relative. I guess the best way to explain it is, What they want is good, but the way they're going about it, it's bad. Really bad.
What are they trying to do? Lucy?
Yes.
Miss Stillman, I need to speak with you. Get up here, now!
On my way, Doctor. I'm sorry, Desmond, I have to go. You should turn in for the night. The answers to all of your questions are right in front of you. You just have to know where to look.
This is pretty much all that happens this time in the modern day, but it is still something to chew on, and it answers a few questions players may have had swimming in their head all these last few hours. Now players know that assassins exist in the modern day as well, and that they're actively looking for Desmond, and their recent actions have people at Abstergo really worried, based on that phone call that Warren got. Lucy also suggests that there is no such thing as bad guys as well at some point, and that just really got me thinking the first time I heard it. I know the entire game has been trying to say that as subtly as possible, but I don't know. Her just saying it so matter-of-fact like just hit me differently. It's like she's just trying to lay it out as best as she can, and Desmond is just too stupid to pick up on it. I suppose the players could also use this time to explore the company's emails, but I didn't do that my first time playing, honestly. And if we're being real with each other, this script is already longer than it should have been. If you really want to know more about them, I highly recommend you pick up the game for yourself and explore them, because I'd really hate to rob you of that magic of reading them for the first times yourself. I remember how jittery I was whenever I figured out these things were in the game after all. With that being said though, I will be discussing the ones that are important to the story eventually, but that's far from all the ones that are in the game. Sabrand is the next in line on the list of Templars, and he's also somewhat of an interesting character all things considered. For starters, he's also gotten word of your endeavors, and he's scared beyond all measure. The man's practically shitting his pants every time he leaves the comfort of his very massive guard tower overlooking the docks of Acker. Altair eventually catches him with his guard down, and he's just as cowardice in death as he was in life. What stuck out to me the most, though, was how he doesn't believe in anything like the rest of his fellow brothers. He claims to have gazed into the abyss and seen things that confirm his greatest fears, that God has abandoned us, and that this life is all we have. He also tells Altair what his role was as well, but the man announces it so defeatedly that you almost want to feel bad for him. He was just a man following orders after all, just like Altair, and the player to an extent. His boss fight, on the other hand, is actually one of the more challenging ones due to how much water is surrounding him, since this game was built on the Scimitar engine and Altair can't swim and whatnot, which is a nice way to integrate the city and its fixed level design into a mission if I do say so myself. Once this is over though, there's also another great bit of dialogue between Altair and Al-Mualim that caught my ear as well.
What news?
Another of the named is put to rest.
Then it would appear your work is nearly complete, and your status restored.
A question, Master, if I may.
Ask, and I will answer.
Why these men, Jubayer and Sabrand?
Don't you see? They pave the way for change. Ensure threats both old and new are not given cause to intervene.
To weaken them is to weaken our enemy. I suppose that makes sense.
Were these men to continue their work, our work would quickly be undone.
How is that? We've caused them much grief.
We strike at the arms, yes, but this is a hydra that you face, and it is quick to replace that which is severed.
Then we should lop off its head and be done with this.
Soon. We are close. Only one more man stands between us and our ultimate goal.
I will return to my work. The sooner this last man dies, the sooner I might face our true enemy.
Before you go, I have a question for you.
Of course.
What is the truth?
We place faith in ourselves. We see the world the way it really is, and hope that one day all mankind might see the same.
What is the world, then?
An illusion. One which we can either submit to, as most do, or transcend.
What is it to transcend?
To recognize nothing is true and everything is permitted. That laws arise not from divinity but reason. I understand now that our creed does not command us to be free. It commands us to be wise.
Do you see now why the Templars are a threat?
Whereas we would dispel the illusion, they would use it to rule.
Yes, to reshape the world in an image more pleasing to them. That is why I sent you to steal their treasure. That is why I keep it locked away. And that is why you kill them. So long as even one survives, so too does their desire to create a new world order. Take your equipment. Seek out this last man. With his death, Robert de Sable will at last be vulnerable.
It will be done.
Safety and peace upon you, Altair.
Yeah, there's been slight glimpses of Altair behaving differently here and there, but this is the true moment Altair acknowledges the creed itself in a much newer light/perspective. And I don't know, I just really like the idea that Altair is changing as the story goes on, and he's not just having a bunch of fun blindly killing people. Speaking of which, Jubiera al-Hakim also has a pretty memorable boss fight, with his being a sort of a scavenger hunt requiring Altair and the player to search through several marked locations on the map until they discover the place Jubiera is actually at. Jubiera is also another one of those Templars who seems pretty okay with all the damage and chaos he's inflicting on the world, and that also makes him pretty realistic in that regard. He believes by burning all these books he's somehow helping the city instead of harming it, which is why I call him realistic. Book bans are something that actually happen regularly in the real world as well, mainly because it's a very good way for leaders and people in powerful positions to suppress critical thinking skills and to remain in those comfortable positions. For instance, in July of 2025, the Trump administration and the Department of Defense Education Activity, or the DODEA, ordered the banning of over 596 books from their libraries, primarily targeting titles that cover LGBTQ+ topics, race, gender, and other forms of sexual education. And going back a bit, as Banned Books Week kicked off back in 2024, a leading free expression group of the US announced that the number of books that were pulled from the shelves or quote-unquote challenged by right-wing groups and or Republican lawmakers skyrocketed by at least 10,000 over the last year, apparently from state legislators passing new censorship laws. PEN America also found that the number of banned books tripled from the 2022 to 2023 school year, when it had already been quietly sitting at 3,362 beforehand. And those are just the numbers from a few years ago, by the way. As of writing this right now in 2026, there has now been an absurd total of over 23,000 instances of book bans that have been documented in public schools across the United States, which is an unprecedented and almost unheard of level of censorship, mind you. So it's probably safe to bet that Jubier would get along just fine with the people who run the world today if given the chance. He's also like a super more than willing to kill anyone who thinks differently than him, which is another thing I can't really get behind. But he does bring up a good point.
You're wrong, and that's why you must be put to rest.
Am I not unlike those precious books you seek to save? A source of knowledge with which you disagree, yet you're rather quick to steal my life.
A small sacrifice to save many. It is necessary.
Is it not ancient scrolls that inspire the Crusaders? That fill Salah ad-Din and his men with a sense of righteous fury? Their texts endanger others, bring death in their wake. I too was making a small sacrifice.
And those words too cut deep on Altair. They make him return to the Rafik with questions, and although not many answers are given due to Altair knowing a whole lot more about what's going on than they do, at least this guy is willing to listen to Altair. You gotta give him points for that. That's some true brother shit. Before Altair can ask any more questions though, Desmond is manually ejected out of the Animus by Lucy to the sounds of an eerie, distorted voice bossing Warren around.
Not a lot of time, Vic.
Understand there's a narrow launch window.
Wherever it's hidden, time to retrieve it.
I'm working on it.
And when it's done,
He'll be taken care of.
I want that progress report by tomorrow morning.
I think there's a problem with the Animus.
Nope, it's working fine.
I'm pretty sure it just ejected me
I'm
when
pretty sure you should shut up.
You ready to finally tell me what's going on?
We have to stop them, Desmond. When they access that last memory of yours, they're just getting started. They want to change everything. The way we live, the way we think, the way we are. You've gotten the lecture from Vidic about what's wrong with the world, how we need order and discipline, so they're going to give it to us. Only we don't have a say in the matter.
How?
The Templar treasure. They think it...
Miss Stillman?
I'm here.
I need you to upload Desmond's files to the database.
Got it.
When the two are alone and get to talking, however, Lucy reveals to Desmond that she's on his side and the two have to do whatever they can to stop Abstergo before they find what they're looking for. Warren calling in between these plot points being addressed is also just so good. It makes the tension in the scene so much more present and intense than it already is. I mean, you can cut the shit with a knife. This is also where the game hints at there being other pieces of Eden as well.
So what? You're using me to find this Templar treasure? What do they call it? The Peace of Eden?
Yes.
Well, it's looking like it's at Messiah, so I don't know why they're wasting all this time with me. Why don't they just send their people to pick it up?
They can't. It's not that simple. The artifact from Messiah, they had it. It was destroyed in the accident.
Then what are they hoping for me? For my ancestor to tell them?
They're hoping he'll show them where the other ones are.
You mean there's more than one of these things?
Oh, Desmond, you have no idea.
Which would later go on to set up the rest of the franchise too, but I highly doubt anybody on the team of the original Assassin's Creed expected the series to sprawl into what it is today based on this one line of dialogue. I mean, it's technically missable if you want to be a Redditor about it, but it is low-key cool that players can hear it in this game since it did eventually go on to become a franchise. Now one with over a dozen entries in it as well at the time of writing this script. Things like that do make moments like these a little more impactful, I can't lie. Lucy also explains the Denver terminology they like to use at Abstergo, as well as mentions something only known as a quote-unquote the accident, but that's all she's willing to talk about it before she focuses on her work again, leaving Desmond and the player desperate for answers as always. Well, technically you can find out what this is, you just have to look in the emails, but like I said, I'm not going to show any of the emails here.
Time's wasting, Mr. Miles.
Yeah, I'm coming.
We're nearly done, you know.
And then what?
You'll see. Maybe they'll even let you watch when it begins. It's not as terrible as you think.
Look, I know you're not gonna let me leave. So why not tell me what's going on? Humor me.
I'm not an idiot, Mr. Miles. I think you've already learned quite a bit.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Of course not.
All right, let me ask you something else then.
Yes?
Some of the stuff I'm seeing in the Animus, sometimes it seems wrong. Untrue, like the history is off somehow. It doesn't
what, Mr. Miles? Match up with what you read on an online encyclopedia? What your high school history teacher taught you? Let me ask you something. Do these supposed experts have access to secret knowledge kept hidden from the rest of us?
There are books, letters, documents, all sorts of source material from back then. Some of it seems to contradict what the Animus is showing me.
Anyone can write a book, and they can put whatever they want on its pages. Anything. Used to be, we thought the world was flat.
Some people still do.
Yes, and they publish books about it. Or that the moon landing was a hoax. I believe there's also a book claims the world was created in 7 days. A bestseller, too.
Where's this going, Doc?
The point, I suppose, is that you shouldn't trust everything you hear, everything you read. What's that your ancestors said? Nothing is true.
Everything is permitted.
Yes, exactly. It's part of what makes the Animus so spectacular. There's no room for misinterpretation.
There's always room.
Touché, Mr. Miles. Now that I've answered your question, can we begin?
Warren's confidence is growing the more Desmond and the player progress in the Animus, and here he's gloating in a way snarkier manner than he ever has before, almost like he knows exactly what's about to happen before it actually happens. At one point he even quotes Altair's ancestors' motto while talking of things to come, which is another great way of the writers blurring the lines between the Assassins and the Templars once again. Although, I'd argue the whole point of this interaction is to get the player to suspend their beliefs of actual history for a second and to enjoy the story. It is a fictional one after all. And the main reason I say that is because this is where Desmond starts to ask whether or not the things he's seeing in the Animus are actually true. Warren claims that they are and that the various high school teachers from around the US have lied to him, but we all know this is obviously just here for the plot to justify its use of the past as a playground, so to speak, and I don't really mind that. I actually liked what the narrative did with the whole King Richard executing prisoners thing, making William do it on Richard's behalf, and then having Richard be upset that William would do something so ignorant and unthoughtful. I thought that was a pretty good twist on the fact that King Richard did in fact execute around 2,700 prisoners during the Siege of Acre. Yeah, the Assassin's Creed version kinda paints the guy in a better light, but I mean, I highly doubt this whole game was a King Richard propaganda act, you know what I mean? Like, I'm pretty sure we can all agree the game is just trying to reinterpret history, and honestly I wouldn't even go that far. I'm just saying it doesn't try to rewrite it.
It's him. Speak then! We have much to discuss. We are close, Altair. Robert de Sable is now all that stands between us and victory. It is his mouth gives the orders. His hand pays the gold. With him dies the knowledge of the Templar treasure and any threat it might pose.
I still don't understand how a simple bit of treasure could cause so much chaos.
The Peace of Eden is temptation given form. Merely look at what it's done to Robert. Once he tasted of its power, the thing consumed him. He saw not a dangerous weapon to be destroyed, but a tool. One that would help him realize his life's ambition.
He dreamed of power then?
Yes and no. He dreamed and still dreams. Like us, of peace.
But this is a man who sought to see the Holy Land consumed by war.
No, Altair. How can you not see when you're the one that opened my eyes to this?
What do you mean?
What do he and his followers want? A world in which all men are united. I do not despise his goal. I share it. But I take issue with the means. Peace is something to be learned, to be understood, to be embraced.
He would force it.
And rob us of our free will in the process.
Strange, to think of him in this way.
Never harbor hate for your victims, Altair. Such thoughts are poison, and will cloud your judgment.
Could he not be convinced, then, to end his mad quest?
I spoke to him in my way, through you. What was each killing if not a message? But he has chosen to ignore us.
Then there's only one thing left to do.
Jerusalem is where you faced him first. It's where you'll find him now. Let this final offering lend you strength. Go, Altair. It's time to finish this.
Now that most targets are dead, however, Robert de Saab is the only Templar left, and word has it that he's hiding out in Jerusalem, the same place the story began. It's certainly poetic to have the story meet itself again like this, and although this isn't the actual end of the game just yet, I feel like the sentiment still applies. Plus, if you were to apply this logic to the actual end of the game itself, it still works, and I'd argue that scene in the Garden lands far better than this one here, but I'm getting ahead of myself again. Memory Block 6 is also home to arguably the best moment in the entire game, which is the moment Altair finally apologizes to Malik for his foolish and arrogant acts all the way at the beginning of the prologue. You know, the actions that cost him his brother. This is when I believe Altair is ultimately redeemed, thus ending his game-long redemption arc that's been casually taking place in the background while players have been progressing from boss to boss. Now, I already know I'm going to get some flack for this, but Altair's character development is honestly some of the best storytelling I've ever had the pleasure to play through in a video game. I genuinely put this story up there with the Red Dead series in terms of dialogue and writing anyway, not in terms of gameplay of course. Mainly just in the regard that Altair is not the same person at the end of the game that he starts out as at the beginning of the game. Malik is right when he claims that Altair is not the same man who walked into Solomon's temple earlier in the game. Now he is a totally different man, in mind, spirit, and behavior. And this is also sort of the first time in the entire game that I feel like Malik and Altair are on the same side and aren't at each other's throats or pelting each other with clever insults. They seem genuinely united against the last enemy they have left standing, Robert de Saab. In-game investigations allude that he's trying to strike a truce with Saladin's army and is going to be attending the funeral of Majidin to help smooth things over and prove he's serious. Who is one of the previous targets Altair and the player have recently dealt with, if you don't remember. I thought the inclusion of attending the funeral of a previous boss was a pretty neat world-building tool. It makes me feel as if my actions actually have consequences in this fictional video game world. Even if this all was just a calculated display for this one specific mission, it's more so about the presentation of things to me, which is why I suppose this moment sticks out to me so much. That and the fact that attending the funeral of someone you played a part in murdering is also kind of just insane in itself, but I digress. Your presence at the funeral was predicted by Robert de Saab though, meaning this is technically the second time players have been bested by a Templar target, but who's counting, right? What's more important to point out though is that Robert used a body double to elude Altair. And to his shock, it's a woman. Altair actually ends up marrying this woman too, believe it or not, but that doesn't really happen until after the events of this first game canonically. I'm not really too sure why the developers or writers decided to include this bit into the game though, if I'm being honest. I think the intent was to highlight that Altair has changed and isn't willing to kill an innocent person so easily anymore, but I don't know if that message really works because you have the option to kill a few of the information givers on your way over here if you really wanted to. Maybe the marriage thing was planned from the get-go, who knows. Either way, she eventually gives Altair the location of a Robert de Saab and explains what his evil plan is in the process because, I mean, of course she would, it's a video game after all. Robert de Saab is planning on making a 4D chess move by meeting with both King Richard and Sultan Saladin and hopefully forming a temporary alliance with the two massive armies and uniting them against the Assassin Brotherhood. And considering how Altair has killed men on each side of these armies, there's a high possibility they might accept this offer. Meaning Altair has to drop whatever he's doing right now and ride it to Arsuf to intercept this deal before Robert has a chance to come to an agreement with King Richard. Malik is against the idea at first, but then Altair reminds him that this is the moment the Creed has always trained them for. Malik thinks that the pair should ride out to Masyaf and ask Al-Mualim what to do before they make any decisions for themselves, but Altair states that if they do this, they risk the enemy growing stronger than they already are. And he also critiques Malik for wielding the Creed as a shield and for not truly abiding by it, or for not being so willing to challenge what they think is the truth. He doesn't insult him or anything like that, he just simply points out that it was Malik that taught Altair the art of perception, and how hypocritical he's being by morally sitting on the fence, so to speak, at a time like this. Plus, Altair also has a suspicion that Al-Mualim is withholding information from him, and Altair already has too much information not to act in a situation like this. So upon further consulting, the pair decide to split up and investigate things for themselves, with Altair riding out to Arsuf to catch Robert and Malik heading back to Masyaf to look into what Al-Mualim has been doing. When both Altair and the player make it to Arsuf, however, the place is little more than a Crusader war zone, and this is also when the game decides to throw like 50 or so soldiers at you on your way to Robert de Saab. I guess in an effort to show how chaotic this battle really was, but other than that I really have no idea. These motherfuckers really just come out of nowhere. You get an achievement for beating them all, but still. In real life, the Battle of Arsuf, which took place in the fall of 1191, was a significant event during the Third Crusade. In it, the Crusader forces faced the army of Sultan Saladin, which greatly outnumbered them at the time. King Richard's tactical approach to the battle, however, demonstrated a careful arrangement of his somewhat 25,000 troops, with cavalry being positioned strategically to withstand the harassment of Sultan's mighty horse archers. Legend has it that when the moment was right, King Richard ordered a powerful cavalry charge that caught the enemy off guard, leading to a decisive victory for the Crusaders. Saladin's forces faced heavy casualties that day, with reports of over 7,000 soldiers lost on his side, all while the Crusaders experienced only around 700 losses, meaning one Crusader soldier fell for every 10 Arabian soldiers slain. Following the Battle of Arsuf, though, the Sultan agreed to a truce, which ultimately allowed the Crusaders to secure control of the coastal regions of the Holy Land, which they would use to go on to set the stage for further military campaigns in the years to come. And this is ultimately another reason why I love the writing in this game so much. This truce that Altair is trying to stop from happening technically actually happened in real life, but Assassin's Creed is just twisting the reason why it happened a little. Altair does eventually catch up with Robert and King Richard though, and when he does, he tries to inform Richard of his partner's betrayal, but the man doesn't know who to believe. So in a bizarre, this really only happens because it's a video game kind of scenario, he asks the two of you to duel out your differences, claiming he has faith that God will side with whoever is truly righteous. The player and Altair are obviously going to come out on top in this situation, but with the information Robert confesses to Altair, it's really hard to call this assassination a victory.
It's done then. Your schemes, like you, are put to rest.
You know nothing of schemes. You're but a puppet. He betrayed you, boy, just as he betrayed me.
Speak sense, Templar, or not at all.
9 men he sent you to kill, yes? The 9 who guarded the treasure's secret.
What of it?
It wasn't 9 who found the treasure, assassin. Not 9, but 10.
A 10th? None may live who carry the secret. Give me his name.
Oh, but you know him well. And I doubt very much you'd take his life as willingly as you've taken mine.
Who?
It is your master, Al-Mualim.
But he is not a Templar.
Did you never wonder how it is he knew so much? Where to find us, how many we numbered, what we aspired to attain?
He is the master of the assassins.
Oui, master of lies. You and I just 2 more pawns in his grand game. And now, with my death, only you remain. Do you think he'll let you live, knowing what you do?
I've no interest in the treasure.
Ah, but he does. The only difference between your master and I is that he did not want to share.
No.
Ironic, isn't it? That I, your greatest enemy, kept you safe from harm. But now you've taken my life, and in the process, ended your own.
This is when Al-Mualim is finally revealed as the secret puppet master who's been carefully orchestrating things for his own selfish reasons ever since the beginning of the game. Robert de Saab also brings up how ironic Altair's actions have been, with all the other previous statements of such beginning to finally make sense to him as well. Even though a good majority of players probably already seen this coming by now, this straight up unravels Altair. You can really see how this betrayal changes everything for him, despite him barely showing any emotion when he has this little chat with King Richard afterwards. The Secret Crusade novel explores more of Altair's sadness that he suffers right here, but the whole thing to take away is that he feels betrayed and alone right now. Al-Mualim was kind of a father figure to him as well as a mentor after all. Altair's outlook on the Creed and Holy Land in general now has been forever changed. He still wants peace, of course, but he never really expected to be manipulated or wielded as a weapon, or was he prepared to be an agent of such chaos. His next goal, however, is to ride for Masyaf and confront Al-Mualim, even if it means this may be the last time they ever meet. Before Altair can actually reach the Brotherhood, the player is thrusted back into Desmond's shoes for a minute. This time, when Desmond is brought out of the Animus, he's done so to the sounds of gunfire and chaos in another section of this once highly secretive facility. Warren and Lucy quickly inform him that these are the sounds of assassins attempting to save him, but to both Desmond and to Lucy's dismay, they don't succeed and are wiped out shortly after the assault actually starts. Warren also informs Desmond that most of the assassins have been taken out by Abstergo, and that the company has been spending a significant amount of time and energy hunting them down this past year. Lucy even apologizes to Desmond when Warren leaves the room. It's pretty clear that she can tell how upsetting the situation must be for him, and since she works for Abstergo, or fake works for them, you can really tell that she feels some kind of guilt for all this. Before he starts to worry too hard, though, she lets him know that his parents were never technically found during any of the multiple raids that Abstergo conducted on the various assassin strongholds scattered throughout the country, which gives him a little more hope at least. But just in case he thinks all is lost, she actually does one better than that. She gives him a little bit of faith as well, revealing herself to be a double agent of sorts, working for the assassins as well. And I know I kind of spoiled this little reveal by mentioning it in the paragraph literally right before this one, but I don't really think it's that big of a deal. I mean, the more astute players have probably picked up on this little fact way before anything is ever actually said about it. Plus, all the in-game emails also point towards the fact that she's one, and they also suggest that she's the one who assembled this little prison break attempt we got to see or hear just now. Which is probably why she was so sorry and sad that it didn't work out too, but that's besides the point. She then warns Desmond that tomorrow will be an eventful day, and suggests that he gets a lot of rest tonight before the two part ways, building the tension as cryptically as possible. When Desmond is abruptly woken up the following morning, it's much earlier than usual, and arguably more importantly, Warren Vidic is much more enthusiastic about today than he's ever been about anything else previously in the entire game. I mean, the man has already said cryptic shit like the ones who came before, and things will be quote-unquote remembered by some of us anyway, so the player's curiosity levels for what's about to happen are already through the roof presumably, and I am glad to tell you that Memory Block 7 doesn't fail to deliver on those expectations one bit. Upon Altair's return to Masyaf, he's greeted with the ramblings of a madman who's praising Al-Mualim with every other sentence he mutters, and venturing further into the city reveals that he's not the only one either. It seems like everyone on the streets have lost their minds, and when Altair makes it closer to the fortress, even the guards he's trusted all of his life turn on him in an instant, and he's forced to kill them. Granted, once he gets an idea of what he's doing, he informs the others and warns them not to do the same, but still. Speaking of others, Malik arrives shortly after making the same revelation that Altair has, the only difference being that he figured it out by reading Al-Mualim's diary. A diary in which he admits to using both the Assassins and Templars as tools to get what he wants, which is absolute power over the Holy Land for himself and himself only.
No! What's happening?
So, the student returns.
I've never been one to run.
Never been one to listen either.
I still live because of it.
What will I do with you?
Let me go.
Oh, Altair. I hear the hatred in your voice. Feel its heat. Let you go? That would be unwise.
Why are you doing this?
I found proof.
Proof of what?
That nothing is true, and everything is permitted. Come, destroy the betrayer. Send him from this world.
Now, Alamoalim's betrayal wasn't the best or most original things in terms of writing, I'll admit, and I'm aware this is normally where the story starts to cave in on itself for most critics, but I never really seen the Alamoalim twist as anything bad personally. One of the biggest gripes I hear players complain about with this twist is that none of the other Templars were willing to sell Alamoalim out in order to save their own hides. Therefore, this somehow completely invalidates his betrayal as being possible for some reason, and I just never really saw things this way. If anything, I think the fact that most of these men don't fear death because they have a tremendous amount of faith that their secret organization will live on and prosper without them makes it far more believable. Do you know how many terrorists and members of extremist groups willingly sacrifice themselves in favor of giving who they think the enemy is as information? Some of these people hate you and what you stand for far more than they value their own life, and if they can somehow die while hurting you or the things you love or to further their agenda, they will take that opportunity in a heartbeat and not think twice about any of it. The only Templar who finally gives up and spills the beans, so to speak, only does so because he was the last one to fall. But let's be real with ourselves for a second. It's not like Altair would have ever learned any of this if it wasn't for him besting him in that sword fight in Arsuf. It was just one last way of Robert getting one over on Altair before he passes on. And goddamn, that's the most spiteful and human thing somebody could do in a moment like that. Other quote-unquote critiques of the plot I've seen suggest that the assassins in general should be a little more weary of Alamoalim, and or that they should have at least been a little more curious as to why he acts so strange. But I feel like anybody who makes this observation is looking at things from a very objective point of view. I feel as if a lot of them seem to forget that the assassins, as in the foot soldiers, and even the more important members of the Creed to an extent, are only given bits and pieces of information to go on during their missions or assignments. You know, kind of like how intelligence agencies actually operate in real life. Do you know how unreasonable and dangerous it would be for your whole organization if you have one spy who knows everything about your guild? Or even worse, how bad things could turn if everyone in your guild knew just as much as the guy in charge. The assassins, like many other secret sects, use compartmentalization and many other clever means to stay in the shadows as much as possible. Otherwise, you'd only need to kidnap and torture one of them to find out where the whole herd of them are, and then they wouldn't be so secretive anymore, would they? And considering how Alamoalim has already found a few traitors under his nose, if you remember hunting down that one at the start of the game, then this makes even more sense and makes it even more obvious why only certain assassins know certain things. Plus, they've also been incredibly indoctrinated and conditioned to trust and believe anything this man says since they were young children as well, mind you, which is another important aspect people seem to overlook as well, but I digress. Soon enough, Altair and the player confront Alamoalim and then are forced to deal with a barrage of illusions he throws at you using the Apple of Eden, alongside a kind of crappy boss fight where he manipulates your health bar for some reason that I wasn't really the biggest fan of, I can't lie. But eventually, Altair and the player get the best of him in battle, in a true storybook moment where the student surpasses the teacher, and then the two share their final words. I know earlier that I said the Altair apology to Malik was one of the best conversations in the entire game, but I'd argue this is up there in the top 3 conversation.
The student does not defeat the teacher.
الشيء واقع مطلق بل كل ممكن.
So it seems. You have won then. Go and claim your prize.
You held fire in your hand, old man. It should have been destroyed.
Destroy the only thing capable of ending the Crusades and creating true peace? Never.
Then I will.
We'll see about that.
Alamoalim's words from earlier in the game soon begin to haunt Altair as he stares into the technical and unfathomable abyss that's on display in front of him. And this is also when the Bible quote from Ecclesiastes in the beginning of the game can be heard again, this time coming through a hell of a lot clearer. The Apple of Eden has seemingly opened up and appears to be a map of sorts, displaying every exact location of the other artifacts of Eden, all the way down to the exact continent. Granted, this is where they were during 1191, mind you, but still, now it all makes a hell of a lot more sense. This is what Abstergo was after all along, which is why Warren's excited expression can be heard right after this monumental discovery through the walls of the Animus.
We've got it.
Once Altair discovers the secrets of the apple, Desmond is once again yanked out of the Animus for the final time and left with more questions than ever, much like the player at home as well, which was definitely intentional. None of them get answered though, as he is now in the presence of Alan Rickon, the CEO of Abstergo and a high-ranking member of the modern-day Templars. He's been hinted at in the form of emails and mysterious voice calls so far, but this is Desmond and the players' first time actually seeing him with their own eyes. He's not as intimidating as the developers probably hoped, I'll admit, but he still gives off the cold and exclusive vibes that the rest of Abstergo radiate, so I'll give him that at least. There isn't much else to take note about though, honestly, mainly because he disappears almost as soon as he appears. If that was how the game ended, I highly doubt players would still be talking about this game today. But the real ending comes when Desmond tries to step off the Animus and accidentally uses eagle vision in real life for the first time. This is such a neat and clever way of bridging the gap between not only Desmond and Altair, but also the fictional world and the Animus's in-game world as well. I mean, just think about that for a second. Eagle vision is literally something the Animus says your ancestors have, and then it just appears as something you can do outside of it. It's such a trippy concept. I know the lore kind of gets rewritten in the later games as far as eagle vision goes, with it eventually becoming known officially as something of a dominant trait the more gifted Isu human hybrid assassins can use due to the amount of Isu blood coursing through their veins, but I feel like the fact that so little was known about the ability at this time is ultimately why it was such a big shock to audiences. The in-lore name of this phenomena is called the bleeding effect, which is caused by prolonged exposure to the Animus. Players can now use this new talent to speculate on what all these mysterious symbols scattered around Abstergo mean though, which are the same symbols Desmond's been having these little mini nightmares about over the course of the story as well, if you remember. There are a plethora of them scattered around the area Desmond is being held in, and although the riddles have already been solved nowadays, can you imagine how awesome this little ARG was for players to come together and try to solve back in the day? I certainly wasn't a part of it at the time, but people came together and dedicated literal websites to piecing every part of these puzzles together piece by piece and to decipher these lines and letters like their lives depended on it. All jokes aside though, this is an incredibly great example of how innovative and interactive video games can be as a medium and as an art. I know people create blog posts and forum threads about TV shows and movies all the time and have been doing so since the dawn of time presumably, but the audacity of the game ending alone, mixed with the abrupt conclusion immediately after such a monumental revelation, one the game has been building towards for literal hours now, sparked an internet-wide discussion like no other at the time. I've seen a few reviews of the game that state the ending is a bit of a nothing burger because of how it leaves so many things open for interpretation, but like I said earlier in the script, I think the fact that this game is willing to trust the audience with such a responsibility as great as that is what ultimately makes this game so good and memorable to me. In a story about thought-provoking questions, it doesn't end things on a definitive answer or conclusion to many of the things it addresses, which I thought was pretty poetic. Most of them that do exist came in the form of the game's many sequels, mind you, but they themselves weren't even written yet or even thought about at the time of this game's release. There's this funny video of Nolan North recalling how he felt about the game's cliffhanger ending when he was doing some of the voice work for this game that I just have to throw in the video since I mentioned it because it literally coincides with this exact topic.
There was a bunch of political stuff. Ubisoft had people, Ubisoft Montreal had people going in and out. I don't know the whole story. I don't know anything about it, but the original story, as it was written, it was Desmond goes on these adventures, and they said we're probably going to do about 6 games. And each game, Desmond will get, this was the original pitch, Desmond would get the abilities of his, Altair, and now he has those. Then it's Ezio, he has them, and then it's going to be this guy. And ultimately, by the last game, he would be the ultimate assassin with all these, and be able to time travel back.
Oh! I didn't use that!
Well, I know, listen, this was, one person told me this, so I may be speaking out of school, but it was like, that would be, and I was like, oh, that's so cool, because the first time I did that first game, I got to the end of the script, and in a 4-hour session, I think it took about 2.5 hours, and they said, okay, that's all set. They said, all right, thanks, Nolan, we're good. I said, and I turned the last page, and I said, I'm just gonna get a cup of coffee, and we'll start up again. And they looked at each other like, oh, that's it. What? This is awesome. What happens? And the writer goes, I don't know. I said, what do you mean you don't know? He said, I haven't written it yet.
Although it's funny to look back on this in retrospect, I think this clip also sets an important sentiment about the rest of the series to come, which is that the writers, both Corey May and Duma Winshew, were totally winging it from the get-go. A lot of people like to shit on the newer writers of the franchise for supposedly steering so far off course from what the original writers had in mind, when all they were trying to deliver was a somewhat thought-provoking narrative that vaguely touched on the concepts of faith, mythology, and morality, all while trying to tie almost every part of the story together and keep it as grounded in the game's mechanics as possible. Most of what actually transpired here was never planned from the start, and when you actually think about it, it's really a miracle everything clicks and snaps together in the way it does in Assassin's Creed 1. No other game in the franchise is ever really constructed or assembled or even presented to players in the way things are in the very first game. In a game most of the developers didn't even think were going to meet sales expectations. To the team's surprise, though, the game managed to sell over 5 million copies by the time its sequel hit stores in 2009, and sold an estimated 8 million copies by the year of 2016, with the franchise it spawned itself also going on to earn over $230 million by the year of 2025, putting the franchise firmly in the number 8 position in top 10 best-selling video game franchises of all time, right behind FIFA, Minecraft, and Grand Theft Auto in that order. The rapid success of the franchise has also been a sort of double-edged sword, though, one that's ultimately divided the fans to the point where, as today, everyone seemingly has their own unique lines in the sand that dictate what they're allowed to deem acceptable or cool for the franchise as a whole. For example, some players seem to take a real big issue with the idea of RPG mechanics in their open-world stealth games, and although I will admit, I do partially see where they're coming from to a degree, as in I don't believe they've properly been implemented yet, I'd be dishonest and bandwagoning a bit if I had to say I despised them or that they ruined my enjoyment of the game or anything like that. To be honest, I don't see them as that big of an issue in the grand scheme of things, or at the very least, not as much as everybody else seems to. But hey, that's just me. Don't let me cramp on your style. The original writers certainly had an idea of what they wanted to portray, but over time, and certainly with a change of writers, developers, and even creative direction as the years went on, the story became a little muddied, at least in one or two areas, because, to put it frankly, none of the shit was accounted for, so it was kind of inevitable if we're being honest. Although I am someone who is far more willing to overlook a few things here and there for the sake of enjoying a story, I can understand if others aren't so forgiving. I also know I'm kind of a hypocrite because I'm sort of critiquing the game by making this video as well, so in the theory, I should be jumping at every opportunity to shit on this game, for the sake of views and rage-baiting purposes of course, but I never really liked to look at Assassin's Creed in that kind of way, or any game for that matter. I may honestly be blindsided by nostalgia because of the few fond memories I have of playing this game when I was a kid and or watching my cousin play it when I was a kid, back when the story went right over my head and I was just in it for the cool hood and fancy parkour gameplay. But if that means I'm forever doomed to admire one of the most beautifully contemporary video game narratives I've ever played through, then fuck it, so be it, man. Assassin's Creed 1 is the most meritorious game in the entire franchise in my eyes. I know the community is pretty split on how they like to see this game nowadays. It's either you love it with every fiber of your being, or you hate it and think that every sequel afterwards did what it wanted to do but better. And although I don't think I belong to either one of those camps of thought, I definitely think this game gets a little overhated or misunderstood at times. Don't get me wrong, I've seen a ton of people online praise this game too, but I've also seen a review or two of people online claiming that this game didn't make them feel anything, or that it's just plain out boring even, and it really just makes me want to ask them if we play to the same damn game or not sometimes. I understand everyone is entitled to their own opinions and that everyone's experience with this game is going to differ drastically from mine, but what some players call repetitive gameplay I actually thought was a unique way of attempting to portray how assassins behave and what work they would actually have to do in order to gather information from their targets. The consequences of the mission variety being so limited is a result in the developers prioritizing realism over gameplay itself. There are a few video gamey-like missions where Altair is tasked with gathering a bunch of flags or whatever, but those are few and far between and are probably the result of the developers running out of ideas, if anything. I'll admit it does get a little tedious by the end of the game, but I never really cared that much because I was participating in the real-world means of gathering information that some modern-day intelligence agencies still practice, and I was traveling through the lands on invisible highways in order to transfer data from place to place, so to speak. Plus, it's not like every letter you pickpocket is the exact same. The information you're gathering is actually important to your mission data and could help you improve on ways to complete it. For example, in Memory Block 2, when Altair kills Tamir, one of the letters you can find on him talks of how the Brotherhood must rely on the support of the Merchant Guild in order to pass their information from one another. And this letter itself reveals to be directed to Al-Mualim, but Altair had no idea at the time. The Templars were essentially trying to establish a network of hidden highways across the lands, much like the Assassins already did with their many bureaus in important cities. And the best part about this kind of thing too is that the actual real-life Assassins did this kind of thing too, using things like merchant guilds, caravans, and sometimes even through hidden informants placed in certain sectors and districts, much like how Altair and his brothers are in this game. Plus, by venturing out into the heart of each district and sitting with its people, not only are you actively engaging in the game's world in a way that is completely unique to this game, but it also immerses me so goddamn well that I can't stop thinking about it. When I sit on a bench and listen to what the word on the street is and hear what people who live in the city are going through, it makes these dusty old 7th generation streets feel far more alive than most of the games that come out today. It's also such a great way to integrate world building into the story without shoving it down the player's throat. By making the player hunt or scavenge for information and letting them tackle the boss of each district when they think they are ready, with the only caveat being that they need to have gathered at least 2 or later on 3 out of the potential dozen or so scraps of information available, it makes each piece of that information to feel meaningful and gives the player a rather unequaled level of agency over their objective. The developers at Ubisoft Montreal like to describe this kind of game design as a flower box instead of a sandbox, which I think in itself is such a beautiful way to distinguish this game's open world from the likes of many other open world games.
So everything you can do with your freedom is basically driving the story forward. In a sense, our big sandbox is more like a flower box in which everything is well placed to experience your freedom in a narrative structure.
And as a bonus, players can even use the pause menu and inspect that info once gathered to read what Altair thinks about it if you're curious, which is a decision that I think is so cool, and I really don't know how I never picked up on this. And if I had to guess, I'd also imagine this is what led to inspiring the other index systems in the later games, you know, the more thought out and detailed ones. This can lead to hints or strategic improvements to your plans of infiltration or even of the assassination itself, meaning the literal thoughts of the protagonist are visualized and can help the player in every way possible. I mean, what other video game does that? Yet another reason why I adore this game so much. It rewards the more attentive players while also not ruining the more casual player's experience either. You don't need an IQ in the triple digits to enjoy Assassin's Creed's story. At the least, you just need to have paid attention in history class 1 or 2 times. Of course, having a deeper level of understanding in these topics of mythology and even religion's references isn't something that would hurt you to have. I wouldn't really say it's required for this game or to have a good time or anything like that. I also just can't help but adore this game. I know it's not perfect or anything, but there's so many things that I prefer in this game that don't seem to make a return in the franchise for some reason. Like the more mature tone, for one. I really liked how the Holy Land wasn't depicted as some happy-go-lucky civilization that had no problems. The place seemed genuinely devastated by the ongoing War of the Crusades, and this felt like a respectful and somewhat authentic presentation of events. I also just can't get enough of Altair and his brooding demeanor, despite that being the one thing that most people couldn't really stand. Even though I don't agree with it all the time, I feel like it fits someone who was sheltered as much as he was, and I like how he ultimately grows out of it as well. One thing I wish they would have utilized a little more, however, is the set pieces of the Third Crusade itself, because in case you didn't know, there was actually some pretty crazy shit that happened over the span of that war. For starters, at one point during the Crusades, both armies witnessed a total lunar eclipse, much like the one people witnessed across the globe back in March of 2007, which would have made this astronomical phenomenon tie in a lot more with the story since this game released later in that year too, but you know, hindsight's 2020 after all. There was also this one point where, shit you not guys, this is actually documented, a cloud started talking to both armies during the battle that I can't believe I'm forgetting the name of right now, and told them that something bad would happen if they didn't stop immediately, and everyone just presumed that this was God speaking to them. I don't know, I'm sure one of the writers could think of something with the Isu to do with that, right? Like that seems like an easy slam dunk. In all honesty, I could ramble on about how much I enjoy this game for hours, like I already have presumably, but I feel like I've dragged this video on long enough. I've already decided to cut a lot of the stuff I originally had planned to include in this video, if you can believe that, like my detailed diatribe of the combat system, but I've actually managed to cut down what was once 2 pages to now 2 paragraphs, so I'll try my best to say that right now. To put it very briefly, the combat mechanics in Assassin's Creed 1 actually have a bit of nuance to them, but the player just has to be willing to engage with them. Sure, you can lock onto your target, hold a high-profile stance, and just wait, but there's no real fun in that. I only ever chose to do that whenever I wanted to just get the fight over with already. Later games like Assassin's Creed 2 would make the combat encounters feel a lot more easier and faster, even adding things like the combo kill into the equation. But in the first game, the timing window of every enemy attack is slightly tighter, and this gives fights a little bit of a heavier, more deliberate feel depending on what weapon you choose to wield. The Hidden Blade was originally not meant to be used in open combat, but apparently it was added in later during development because the testers wanted to feel the fantasy of fighting with it. The thing I love the most about this weapon though is that if you miss a counter, you get punished hard. But if you nail a counter, it's almost like landing a perfect parry, and you get the ability to insta-kill the enemy, no matter how much armor they're wearing. So in a stroke of luck, the developers created a pretty dynamic weapon. It essentially has a really good high-risk, high-reward kind of aspect to it, because of how the parry window is less forgiving than the sword or the short blade, but the caveat being that the Hidden Blade will one-shot any enemy up to the end of the game, as to where the sword and short blade eventually stop doing that halfway through the game when enemies' armor increases. So much so that there's honestly enough here that an entire video could be dedicated to the understanding of the mechanics, just like people have already dedicated to the learnings and the teachings of the more hidden parkour aspects this game doesn't outright explain to you. Although I've never really been quite good at them, I'll admit, there is a special kind of way people can just move and play this game once they've cracked the code that is the parkour system. And it's just beautiful to watch after having played the game for yourself, and once you're aware of the tremendous amount of skill required to pull some of this stuff off. I'll probably put a few videos on screen to showcase what I'm talking about, because I've always been one to admire the mastering or perfecting of a game's rules or rhythms. I don't know, that kind of talent is just incredibly impressive to me, no matter what video game's on display. Which brings me to my ultimate conclusion, where I'll try my best to say my final piece about Assassin's Creed 1. This game has been one that I've wanted to cover on the channel for a long time now. Believe it or not, I've actually put off writing this script for over a year now because I felt like I just wasn't saying anything of much value at the end of the day, and or like I wasn't really adding anything new to the conversation within the rest of the community. And in a way, I still have the feeling as if I haven't said anything of actual value yet, despite the absurd length of this video. But over time, I've come to accept that I'd rather go down as one of the guys who just rants about how much he loves the games on the internet he likes, instead of being another one of those countless others who would jump so eagerly at the opportunity to unnecessarily knock someone else down for admitting they liked something on the internet. Like I see happen so often in various forms of discourse about these very games on different platforms, channels, and other areas of the internet. If Assassin's Creed was a standalone title and this is where the story ended, it would probably be regarded in a far more favorable light than it is nowadays. But that's where the true problem of the Assassin's Creed franchise arose. The breakout success of this game and the insane amount of positive feedback Ubisoft received for this game would not be unnoticed by the guys in charge, so to speak. Or, for a lack of better words, the game was burdened by the roots of its own ambitious nature. But with that being said, that burden can also be seen as a gift. I know this game was never really put together in the most sound way, or even in the exact way that developers may have wanted, as they've come to admit in the following years, but despite all of that, it is still a solid foundation that would go on to hold the rest of the franchise together for years to come, which is even more impressive when you consider that a large portion of that weight was never even accounted for in its initial development. The series has essentially been a long-running game of Jenga, with each new writer, artist, developer, and even archaeologist trying to craft something that fits within the already established blocks on the table, while also still making something they can definitively call theirs as well. Some nail it and others don't. That's the luck of the draw, I suppose. One thing is for certain though, this is a job I never want to have because that is an enormously hard task for any artist in my opinion, and I can already barely get these essays or retrospectives, analysis, whatever you want to call them out as it is. There's still typically a 2 to 3 month time span in between my uploads, despite my constant attempt to cut that number down. Assassin's Creed initially began as an ambitious exploration of things like history and power, but it inevitably became a globe-trotting franchise spanning both continents and generations, and in doing so, it undeniably diluted some of its early austerity surrounding the franchise and sacrificed its more mature themes in hopes of attracting and appearing to a much larger audience. The success of Assassin's Creed 1 all but guaranteed the production of a sequel, while also saving Ubisoft's financial future for the time being as well. Fortunately for those players who weren't yet done with Altair though, he would receive 2 more official spin-off titles before the next release of the mainline games, one being a DS/mobile game known as Altair's Chronicles, and the other one releasing on the PSP known as Assassin's Creed Bloodlines. He even got his own official book in the core novels as well, but like I mentioned earlier in the video, players would have to wait until 2011 for that to be written. Although the next entry into Altair's story would eventually come, it was still a ways away. But let's be real here. Most fans were not buying into these games just for Altair alone, especially not after what was announced soon afterwards. Before I get into that though, I also can't help but think about this one quote I read from Alan Core, a Ubisoft managing director, in a 2004 BBC interview about the failure of Beyond Good and Evil of all places, but I digress. In it, he says, and I quote, "If you don't do risks, you don't exist. Apart from EA who are not taking many risks because they can afford not to." End quote. Putting the obvious shade thrown at EA aside, I actually admire this quote so much, because let's be honest, what is Assassin's Creed if not one huge, lovely risk? And I know you can kind of tear this quote apart with how ironic it is when applied to the now creatively stagnant company it was boasting about back in the day, but I don't think that takes anything away from the message it was going for. And for what it's worth, Ubisoft Montreal were able to prove him right too. It only took them a few years after it was said to do it. But they did do it. That's the important part. They did it with Assassin's Creed, and then they decided to put a magnifying glass up to that success and feedback they gathered from that risk, and then they said, you know what, we could probably do it all over again. Hey, what's going on everybody? Real life Seth here. Just wanted to say, you know, if you've made it this far into the video, thank you. Genuinely, means a lot to me. This is obviously the first video in my, what will soon be series of Assassin's Creed retrospectives, I imagine. I apologize for the script being so, like, repetitive at times and whatnot, and not being really the best, but, I guess that kind of fits it being with the very first Assassin's Creed game, in my opinion. Hopefully the next ones will be a whole lot better, you know what I mean? I can't really promise that though, until they're written, of course. Just wanted to explain that, I guess, and just give a real life, like, genuine person-to-person thank you. I don't really show my face a lot on the channel. I don't know why. I made it my profile picture is me, but I mean, that's really about it. I mean, other than that though, thanks for watching. I mean, I have a Patreon, you don't really have to subscribe to that or anything, but if you want more Assassin's Creed, stay tuned. I have other things in the plans, or in the works as well. I have no idea when they'll actually be finished though, like always, but if you liked what you saw, you know what, go on subscribe, stick around, and oh, I apologize for you hear the birds right now? There are so many bird sounds that made it into this video that I just couldn't stop, so like, I'm sorry about that. That was the other thing I wanted to apologize for, like the audio in this video. There was a bunch of rain, birds, but I just had to get it recorded. Like, there's just no way I was gonna throw away 8 paragraphs of takes just for like 3 drops of rain in between all of them or whatever. I hope you guys can understand, but again, I apologize. I understand that like audio fidelity is really important. But hey, you know, with that being said, if you liked what you saw, stick around, subscribe. Definitely got more coming your way. And until then, oh, there's a plane going by right now. Perfect. Alright, later guys, I'm gonna go and cut this. I doubt this has any better audio than the rest of the video. Alright, later.